Happy Sunday, SMITE fans. You are watching the final day of the group phase here in Season 8 of the SPL, just prior to the Phase 1 playoffs kicking off. And, of course, we have to give a shout-out to our sponsors, Alienware, sponsoring us this year in the SPL. If you want more information, go to smitegame.com/Alienware and use code AW. Maybe pick up some Alienware gear of your own. So thanks again to Alienware for sponsoring us here in Season 8 of the SPL. But there is a long day of action ahead of us. I can't do this alone. Taco is with me. And Taco, the first matchup we've got here, Kings up against the Scarabs, it's pretty cut and dry, right? If you win, you're in, and if you don't, you're out.
It seems simple enough, but you also have to consider the other perspective here for the Camelot Kings. They actually have the potential, I believe, if they're able to clinch today in 2-0 fashion, to find themselves as number one seeding heading into playoffs.
Yeah, and look, this matchup earlier on might not have looked as interesting as it is now. The Kings on an absolute tear throughout most of the part here in Season 8. And the Scarabs needed a little bit of build-up time, so it's taken a little bit to get there. But the Scarabs now looking like this team that might be able to compete.
The Scarabs, for sure, have been a team that has shown us consistent progress through each of their sets. And while they haven't necessarily come out on top every single time, the fact of the matter is they're still managing to find at least game ones every now and then throughout their sets. And again, I really just have a deep appreciation for a team that is willing to show flexibility in terms of adaptations. And this is a team that they're not really scared to try anything, whether it leads in failure or if they're able to find a surprise win for themselves. Well, I shouldn't really call it a surprise at these guys, because it usually is very intended what they're going for. They definitely love to have a huge aggressive manner, though, in the early to mid game. I think that's been one of their more immediate switch ups throughout their progression in the split one. They just have a tendency, I think, to really try and prioritize some of those more aggressive picks for their front line especially.
Yep. We'll be able to sink our teeth into that matchup here in a little bit. We've got another good one, though, rounding out this weekend, the Bolts versus the Titans. And what a way to round out what has been a crazy week so far here in the group stages. Starting off the action were the Titans, who will finish off the action here against the Bolts up against the Leviathans, who found the 2-0 win. And then that close set versus the Scarabs on Thursday afternoon definitely raised some eyebrows. The Scarabs, remember, beat the Jade Dragons earlier on. They take the Dragons to 3 there on Thursday afternoon. Plenty of game threes here this weekend that we haven't really gotten used to so far here in Season 8, but that shows that the action is heating up at the right time.
Well, I think that's the fun part about it all, really, when you picture the start of Split 1, and we saw a lot of 2-0s actually taking place. So it's very evident that these teams are all starting to find a little bit more of that mesh that we were looking for some of these transitioning rosters, bringing on some not necessarily new talent, because a lot of these players have played with each other for years, but just not necessarily on the same team, and Titans are a prime example of that. This is a team that I think people were expecting to make a little bit more noise. I know I was definitely anticipating a little bit more noise at the start, but given some ping disparities, and then on top of that, you add in the fact that this is going to take just a little bit of time for them to mesh. But I was really impressed by what we've seen out of them so far, and I think that this could prove to be a challenging set for the Bolts today.
And I think the Oni Warriors is a team that fit into that category as well, where
for sure
we thought that right off the bat, the Oni Warriors would be, top 3 team. They'd be competing with everyone, top 4 at least, and it took a little while for that team to get there. Now starting to hit that stride. Oni Warriors beating the Jade Dragons, as you can see, yesterday in a 3-game set. So very, very important win, and changes kind of the face of Group B as we end up moving forward here. So that sets up big matchups here. You can see the final 2 matchup this weekend, the Camelot Kings versus Solar Scarabs, and then the Olympus Bolts for the Tartarus Titans. And how different today would look if the Jade Dragons had beaten the Oni Warriors there. You're still in a situation where the Camelot Kings would have to beat the Scarabs, and the Scarabs would have to beat the Kings. And that's just such a wild thought. And kind of final thoughts on that, Taco, before we jump in to kind of the X's and O's of this matchup. What a crazy world we live in, where the Camelot Kings, who have had a tear here so far in Season 8, could maybe not make it to the Phase 1 playoffs, and it's the Solar Scarabs who could send them by the wayside?
Well, I think that that's just also kind of feeding into the whole discussion that when it comes to the SMITE Pro League, at the end of the day, these are all fairly seasoned players. And even if every single roster hasn't necessarily had members playing since the very start in the SMITE Pro League, the fact is a lot of these guys have been around the scene long enough to get a pretty good read on some of the play styles that they're going up against. And I just think it's a heavy tribute to the fact that all of these teams could take sets off of each other, if not games, given any day.
Well, you can see there, Group A, Valhalla Valkyries. Unfortunately, the only team confirmed out of the Phase 1 playoffs here so far, and you can see how close-knit that Group B is. Solar Scarabs 0-2, and their opponents, the Camelot Kings, 1-1. So if the Solar Scarabs win, they'll be 1-2, and the Camelot Kings will be 1-2, and then the head-to-head is that first tiebreaker, and that's where the Solar Scarabs would leapfrog over the Camelot Kings. So it's just that simple for the Solar Scarabs. You get a win, and you're in, and you lose, you're out. And it's the same case for the Camelot Kings. But let's talk a little bit, Taco, about the Solar Scarabs and the improvement that we've seen here from this team. Even in matches where this team does not win, it feels like they're taking some of these top squads to 3 games, and even if it's an 0-2, some of those games have been looking more competitive. Their feet are getting underneath them.
And a lot of that, I think, could be credited to the fact that the front line has really stepped it up in my eyes. Inbound came in a little bit shaky, but he has certainly been a very pivotal member for the success that this team has been able to find through their sets. Even if they haven't, like I said, won the set, they have been able to at least take games. And Solar Returl as well, being part of that front line, watching the synergy that SOT and Inbound have been able to kind of convey over time. It is really cool to just see some of these more rookie members putting in the show.
Right, and it's so important with those rookie members. And you mentioned this, and I think it's a great point that bears repeating. When you have kind of a rookie core like that, not Inbound, of course, he's returned to the SPL this year, but with Layers and Baronic, 2 out of 3 of your mid 3v3 are quote SPL rookies. On the wings, you got SOT and Zatman, so it's so important to be able to lean on talent like that to help push your team forward. And SOT has grasped at the solo lane god pool pretty effectively. He's played tier a couple of times in his last 6 games, Cullen there as well, and can absolutely tie that to King Arthur.
I'm sorry, I had to laugh a little bit because you said solo lane god pool for a second, so it's like, yeah, SOT's got a killer Cullen and a killer King Arthur.
Yeah, right. It's more of a puddle. It's like, what is it in science
Not really
class
their fault
when you're like trying to mix the vials perfectly and you got the little droplet going one at a time. It's like one King Arthur drop, one Cullen drop.
And every now and then they'll let them have fun with a tier or some Wukong, but that's still
But then you open the vat too much and it changes colors and the whole experiment is ruined, and we're sad about it. So we expect to see more Cullen and King Arthur then today, Taco.
I would imagine so. They've just been such prevalent picks, largely just because of the fact that you can solidify your front line pretty early on and still leave the rest of your draft relatively open-ended. And it's largely just the fact that if one side ever opts for either Cullen or King Arthur, it does put a lot of pressure onto the enemy team to then want to try and prioritize their frontlining member. Otherwise, they'd probably just end up being banned out in that 4th, 5th banning phase. And I think a large part of the reason why so many teams can't really make that shift into just looking towards banning out either King Arthur or Cullen in that initial 3-ban phase is simply because of the fact that it would just make it too easy for the first pick team or even for the second pick team to have a really strong response. And getting either King Arthur or Cullen is just kind of a runaway laning phase.
And we'll get to jump into this. I have some questions about at what point, if ever, is it worth banning King Arthur, Cullen, things like that. That's more analysis that we have in picks and bans, but for now, SOT will join me for the pre-game interview. I'm interested to pick his brain a little bit and hear his thoughts kind of on how this whole squad is preparing. SOT, first off, thanks for sitting down, taking the time here this morning. Look, it's the most important matchup of the year so far for you guys. Mm-hmm. You've made these runs, you've taken these games and sets off top teams. And now it's a win-and-in situation for you. How is the team dealing with maybe the highest pressure game so far here in Season 8?
That's pretty much right. I mean, we're very excited. We're pretty much at an all-time high almost. We've done pretty well our past few sets versus top-10 teams, almost getting set wins. So we're pretty confident that we can at least 2-1 today. Probably 2-0 though.
Fair enough. It's going to be an interesting matchup. Not only you guys versus the Kings as a whole, but I think you versus Variety becomes very, very important in this matchup. Variety's been playing well. You've been playing well. We highlighted you here when talking about your team. What goes through your mind in this particular matchup against Variety, or are you not concerned about the player on the other side? You're just worried about playing your game in the solo lane?
Yeah, I'm not too concerned about the matchup. I think Vardy's a great player, and we both kind of play the same god pool. I mean, good calling, King Arthur, but I'm pretty much just worried about. I'm not worried. I'm pretty much just focused about like rotating to fights, doing more in team fights. Because I think the lane will be kind of 0-0-1 for 20 minutes until we start rotating. So, yeah.
Maybe a solo kill or two if we're lucky, but I imagine you guys more focused on getting in those fights in a healthy manner. SOT, thanks so much for sitting down with me, and best of luck.
Thank you.
Yep. And so the Solar Scarabs solo lane are feeling confident, which is the most important thing for that side of the map, of course, because that's all that's going on that side of the map. The Camelot Kings, the opponents of the Solar Scarabs today, and the solo laner there is Variety, as I mentioned, over to SOT. And Taco, I think Variety has been a standout player on a standout team here. He's quietly put together maybe one of the better solo lane performances of any player here in Season 8.
It's been a reoccurring theme across the board in the SPL. A lot of these solo laners seeming to have a ton of respect for one another. Maybe because of the fact that these guys are all playing the same two gods and they're just taking turns switching
Cthulhu.
off. But it is interesting to
that?
see the Kings shift Variety at times onto the less pressure during laning phase, but more space creation during team fight phase.
Yep.
And that'll be the contrast that I'm curious to check out today, because I feel like if Variety tries to run any of these Guardian picks against Solar Patrol might just look to abuse it during the laning phase. Layers as well. He's got a lot of intuition, I think, as a jungler. And I would definitely anticipate him to put a whole heck of a lot of pressure and just not really allow any of that blue buff sustain to come through from Variety. So I am expecting Variety to maybe stick it to a little bit more traditional between the tier Collins and King Arthur, simply for the fact that they just don't really want to give an end to this Solar Scarabs roster, because this is technically their playoffs lifeline on the line.
That's a good point. You can, for both of these teams, effectively say the playoffs start today, right? I mean, this is the first round of the playoffs. The knockout rounds begin for both the Camelot Kings and the Solar Scarabs. There's a world, of course, where if the Kings win, then you go to plus-minus, because now there's a three-way 2-1 tie on top of this group. So the math does shake down into something interesting if the Kings win. But it's very simple, where you win, you're in, you're out, you're out. And so you imagine this Kings team will have that mentality in a correct spot to show up today.
And don't get me wrong, this Kings roster is not one that I would ever expect to fold under pressure by any means, but I would definitely argue the case that there is a little bit more pressure being added onto the Camelot Kings to perform here and come out with a set win, as opposed to the Scarabs, because even just looking at it from the public point of view, many people still, it's like, yeah, we can clearly see that there is some improvement from the Scarabs, but have they figured it out just yet? So I think it's a little bit more difficult for the Kings to get a solid read on the Scarabs, because, like I was discussing earlier, they are a team that is willing to take risk, and having veteran members like Zapman to kind of hold the torch for these guys and sort of just guide them through, I can imagine Steve getting a little janky with it.
And look, and that's kind of the identity, isn't it, that the Solar Scarabs team has started to figure out, where there were teams last year in Season 7 that even later on into the year, I don't know if they fully found that identity. It seems like the Scarabs, though there's a lot of room to grow, have kind of leaned into some of that jankiness. They realize that maybe that's the edge that they have over more cut-and-dry teams like the Camelot Kings. We've talked a lot about the solo lane. I want to look at the jungle matchup a little bit here. Captain Twig up against Layers. More specifically, sticking with the Solar Scarabs jungler, I think Layers has been on an absolute tear here recently. A slow start for him and the rest of the Scarabs roster. But as of late, Layers has been playing well.
The Twig Layers dispute for me is just the battle of traditional versus unconventional, and Layers is the one that I'm largely looking at more in that unconventional category than Captain Twig. And I also think that their playstyles kind of reflect their individual identities, because Captain Twig, with all of his experience throughout his time in the SPL, I think that he is someone who can definitely recognize what picks are going to best complement his team's compositions. So he's got great flexibility for this Camelot Kings roster, but at the same time, I think where Layers really stands out to me in the jungle is that he's not scared to try and put all of the pressure onto him. He will go for the hero plays and usually come out on top.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to watch Layers pilot some of those unconventional picks from times out of the jungle. We've gotten used to seeing a little bit of this. The Ymir first overall ban, Sobek then gets answered out. Then the next two are a little bit more focused, I think, on the players on the opposing team specifically. Hercules gets taken away from the Solar Scarabs, and then Terra taken away from Genetics. Then the Giannis ban is there as well. So if we continue looking sort of at the solo lane, both options between King Arthur and Cuchulainn are available. Anything jump out at you as maybe missing, though, from the ban phase?
A potential Raw ban, maybe. That has been a fairly popular ban against the Kings just because we've all seen the kind of success that Big Man Tings has been able to accomplish whenever he gets that type of sustained pick. But the Terra ban is what really stands out to me here, and I actually really enjoy seeing that switch up for the Solar Scarabs. But I like the fact that they went with the Ymir. I can't really hate on that. I think that this is more so one of those things where if the Kings do decide, if Tings does decide that he wants to run that Raw and he finds a lot of success with it, then maybe that's a switch up that they could potentially discuss for game number 2. But for the start, I think that they definitely have the right direction here. Just grabbing the King Arthur for solo Troll, making sure that he has a very strong laning phase matchup that's going to pose a lot of issues for this Kings.
And then Fafnir gets left open as well. And Fafnir has been such an interesting topic of conversation out of that support category where, the Ymirs have been talked about, the Emojis have been talked about a good bit, but there's a world now where Fafnir maybe needs to be the support that's first and foremost in our minds because, look, Yemoja's still on the table. The likes of that pick have been disputed as well, but Fafnir is what the Kings feel like is the most powerful support left available.
And Gilgamesh to complement the Fafnir is mostly what I'm keeping an eye on because that's a relatively aggressive early to mid game. It transitions pretty well into the mid to late game as far as objective control is concerned because you have that Gilgamesh ultimate, you have that Fafnir ultimate. So what I really, this is a great pickup here for Veronic. I was about to ask, I would like to see some big burst damage so that the Solar Scarabs can have a reasonable contention on these objectives. I like the pick of the Chiron. It also provides that little bit of CC immunity depending on how well the Solar Scarabs can utilize that training exercise, but the Raijin is what really stands out for me. But this is also a pick where I think Veronic has largely struggled a little bit with having a little bit more of that individual standout performance, and so this is a chance, I think, for Veronic to really show the kind of player presence that I think he was able to represent throughout his time in the SMITE console league, and I think that it could work out really well for him here.
And I'm thinking Raijin that makes me jump to Shinto yesterday and some of the disgusting damage that we saw the Raijin outpouring throughout some of those games. So I think my expectations for Raijin in general are at an all-time high here going into game number 1. Medusa, such an interesting pick that's been on the rise here at the SPL level. We've seen this pick, I think it was Netrioid the last time, and I'll pull that up to confirm. Netrioid grabbed this pick, or maybe it was Cyclone Spin that had this that I'm thinking about, where the Medusa just picked up a couple of kills in the early game and things just kind of snowballed.
And that's the scary part about Medusa here as well, because Medusa does have a lot of laning phase power impact. She can be really tough to get up close and personal with. Chiron, we all have seen that level 2 advantage where he looks for the giddy up, but Medusa kind of shuts that down because you don't want to get caught up in her lacerate. It deals a lot more damage than what I think most people would probably even expect, and not only that, but when you add power and then you combine it to the Fafnir attack speed that Fafnir can bring with that coerce, it makes Medusa a little bit more potent.
It does, and it was Netrioid that played the Medusa that I'm thinking of. It was 7-1-4 for Netrioid the last time we saw this Medusa pick come through. So Chiron versus Medusa, a matchup that we've started to get a little bit more familiar with. We'll catch up, though, with the ban phase here. Yemoja left open to the second wave of ban. Tsukiyomi taken off the table by the Kings as well. And then Sol and Cuchulainn. So the Camelot Kings let the solo lane pick drop down a little bit more, but one of the picks that Variety has gone to when King Arthur Cuchulainn tier hasn't been picked. It's been the Osiris, and it looks like that's what the Kings are comfortable with.
This could also potentially be Gilgamesh locked in as the response for the King Arthur. It wouldn't really shock me if it is variety on the Osiris. I think that Gilgamesh and Osiris are both fairly interchangeable with that solo lane, but I also think that Twig might prefer the Osiris in that jungle position just because it has a little bit more lockdown potential for early ganks against the duo lane. And that's more so what I'm keeping an eye on, is how much pressure is the Kings roster actually going to be able to apply towards these carries, because Chiron and Raijin, for all the damage that they can bring, definitely have a tendency to suffer without a heavy front line to deal with it. And the set hover is what I do find to be a little interesting. We have seen layers also lean into that Ratatosker, and it brings a great introduction to just kind of causing chaos in the backline, but it seems as though the set is what he wants to take his money with.
Yeah, I look at this front line for the Kings, and it's just brutal. Gilgamesh, Fafnir, Osiris, that's not something I'm wildly excited to jump in against. The Solar Scarabs, though, on the other side, looks like King Arthur and this Fenrir that you're excited about over there, Taco, will be controlling, hopefully, this front line space for the Chiron, the Raijin, and the set to operate.
I'm excited about the Fenrir because I just think that it has a lot of striking similarities to the Hercules that we saw inbound on. And have to remember, when inbound gets these more aggressive picks, I just think it's so much more suitable to his playstyle. He has a lot more opportunities to look for control in that mid-jungle team fight. And it's also kind of implying to me that Scarabs might just be looking to try and barrel down on that solo side of the map and really just give this Chiron and Raijin a little bit more opportunity to generate farm, get themselves online for that mid-game team fight.
Yeah, the Fenrir carries a lot of weight with it, given how much success we've seen that pick have at the SPL level. Speaking of having success in the group phase so far, at least on this side of the group, Merlin's been picked 4 times. Merlin has won 4 times. So that is how the Kings will round out their draft here. You've got a Medusa and a Merlin piloting that backline for this Kings squad. Is that a duo that you can see having some success?
For sure, but I think the same could be said for either side. Both of these teams, I think it really just depends on who's able to actually maintain their buff timers, because I think invades are definitely a strong potential either direction. And not only that, I really want to keep an eye on this Merlin, because personally I feel as though the Raijin pickup is a little bit more favorable for Baranik here. And even though Tings has had success in the past, he has arguably looked like he's had the most difficulties with that ping on characters like Merlin.
Yeah, that's a good point. The last time in the last 6 games, only once in the last 6 games has BMT played this Merlin. 0-4-2 was his KDA up against the Jade Dragons in a loss there. Actually, speaking of big man Tings, he's played 6 different gods in the last 6 games. So hats off to a guy with a little bit of flexibility here. Looking at the Solar Scarabs draft, though, what is the win condition in your mind for this team? What gets the Solar Scarabs a win against what is a very aggressive, in-your-face style front line that the Kings have?
Early game pressure. They need that early game pressure because they cannot permit these kinds of games to go extended, because when you're dealing with the likes of a Fafnir into arguably a pretty auto-attack dependent team with that Medusa and Osiris and Merlin as well, great objective shred. So in my mind, if the Scarabs are able to shut down the Kings mid to late game by just ramming at them in the early game, that'll make it a lot more feasible for the Solar Scarabs to then continue that laning pressure into objective fights. And if the Kings are far enough behind, they're never really going to get a chance to utilize that Fafnir.
Do you think then it's for the Kings it's as simple as just the opposite, where if you're able to withstand the early game from the Solar Scarabs, then that's your win condition for the Camelot Kings in game 1?
For the most part. Granted, there are definitely some components that have a decent bit of early game pressure. I mean, everything aside from the Merlin, in my mind, could arguably get the one up over the Scarabs if they're not as clean in their execution. So for sure, Kings have much better reinitiation and just initial initiation. But the Solar Scarabs, if they are able to properly execute, like what I'm sure they're going to be trying to hold themselves to a standard of, then this could be problematic for the Kings.
And remember, this matchup cannot be understated. The playoffs effectively starting today for both of these two teams. Win and in for the Solar Scarabs, win and in for the Camelot Kings. And this is a Solar Scarabs team that has not shied away from these big-time matchups. Remember, this is the team that's beaten the Jade Dragons. They've taken games off the Jade Dragons. Can the Kingslayers do it to the Kings? Game number 1 starting right now.
Very much, Dave and Taco, Aggro, and Gore on the cast for Game 1. And Gore, you heard Dave say it right there. We are somehow in a position where the Solar Scarabs or the Camelot Kings, only one of these teams is going to move on to the playoffs, and that is true of the Camelot Kings despite their phenomenal Phase 1 record. You got to perform when it comes to these group stages, and they haven't not performed, but they also haven't played like we saw during Phase 1.
Yeah, it hadn't been the lights out expectations that we had for them coming into this. I mean, looking at this group, everybody had kind of argued, there was a lot of discussion saying, man, the Dragons and the Kings are just going to have a nice, easy coastline right into the first and second spot, whichever one takes first, whichever one takes second. Now the Dragons are shakily, like, just steadily there between second and third, and I would argue maybe even a little barely at that with the way they were playing.
Yeah.
And the Kings are on the verge of getting knocked out. I think it kind of came through and absolutely subverted expectations.
I think a lot of that credit goes to the Oni Warriors and how they stepped their game up here at the group stages, and that's what you're hoping for from a lot of these veteran teams, to step up and elevate their game to the next level. And it's up to the team like the Solar Scarabs. It's a little bit more rookie heavy in order to match that level. But Gore, for my money, I think they have. I think that Inbound has played a lot better during this group stage. I think SOT has taken a more leadership role, and these side lanes for the Scarabs have really done great work.
Yeah, the last, I guess, 3 weeks of play total from the Scarabs has been a lot better than the first, whatever that is. I guess actually in that case, 3 weeks of play from the Scarabs, right? The first 3 weeks were not good from them, just pretty, and literally up to week number 3. It didn't, like, it was getting slightly better each week, but not enough that it was able to make the guess for the jump we would see from week 3 to week 4. And I'm excited to see what they have here.
Hello?
Oh, jeez.
Zapman, hello. The game has started, my friend. A minute 30 in, he gets a rude awakening. And you know what, Gore? I can't blame him because he took a ton of damage up front, and it's because of this upgraded Sunder for Genetics. So often we do see Sunder started in these supports, but they don't have it upgraded, so you're not taking that increased damage. He was, in that instance, increased damage by 20%, and he got absolutely one-tapped by this duo lane.
Yo, I'm going to explain this in very quick terms. 20%, that's a lot.
Yes.
In late game, that's a lot.
Yes.
In early game, it feels like so much more, especially when you're going up against something like a Medusa who's going to flourish at this stage of the game. That, I don't blame him. I don't blame me. I had no idea that damage was about to come out on the Zap, and I don't think there's a lot of ways to come back from that, except now you have 60 seconds where you don't have to worry about it. That cooldown being a little longer means that Genetics is going to have to slow down a little bit, but that is a good first blood to get. If you want anyone on this team getting some farm, it would be your duo lane, and I think getting Netroid ahead is definitely a good avenue for the Kings to win this one.
Inbound is headed back to base, and he's picked up a Hand of the Gods, but was unable to complete the boot. So he's going to walk in, pop his horrific emblem,
over here,
and just buy some time. But as Gore mentioned, Twig is local, and even with that Hand of the Gods, 1v3, that might not be the call to go in and try and steal. He will not be able to secure his own purple despite that gold investment.
Now, this is something that the Kings did really well. I want to say, like, prior to the Ymir wall nerfs, where Genetics just was very good at running this lane in however fashion he saw fit. He would skip boots, or he'd go directly into boots too, specifically to chase you down a little bit better. All these little fun avenues where it was just, how can I be aggressive as Genetics? And now it's upgraded Sunder. If he's going to keep changing it on you, as long as he can continue to find that style, that's what gave them a lot of the success they had in Phase 1. The Scarabs have a Finra, though. That's kind of the balancing act, right? Since they have that, theoretically it should be pretty solid for them to be able to get some control back on this, but they also have a level lead everywhere else.
Nice little flicker from Big Man Tings prevents the damage coming through from Inbound and Baronic. As I just noticed, Score, all the Kings players, they have the King title on.
Yeah.
And you know what? Normally I get a little tilted seeing those titles because they throw me off whenever I'm casting.
It's good for them.
But I like it's good thematic play by the Camelot Kings.
I think
like
because, like, World Champion is allowed, and I think the other ruling was if it's not World Champion, you can't have it. And they were like, but what about us?
But what about us?
Branding, please. And they said, well, you know what? It just happens to already exist. So have fun with it. And it is nice to see them coming through.
I think they made the right call.
I don't think it's affected them positively or negatively, except it looks good.
Well, that means positive because as our
and branding.
Right, and branding, of course, which is always solid. But as Tyler, our production man, always says, look good, feel good. And you're going to be feeling a lot better whenever you got your title on. Inbound a little bit behind still after Genetics getting that first blood and that purple buff pressure. So Inbound still only level 4. And obviously whenever Fenrir is in that support role in particular, we have to talk about Ragnarok and how much that ultimate is going to impact the build choice of the enemy team. Oftentimes, when you see this pick, it's 5 sets of beads on the other side, but that is not the case here, Gore. In fact, it's only 2. Captain Twig, no CC immunity in the kit, elects for the blink anyways. Variety goes teleport, and Genetics has that Sunder.
And that's bravery, I think, a little bit, but also maybe expectations that they're not going to get completely shredded early on. I mean, I see Set and Raijin behind them. That's scary to think of if they get aggressive onto them.
Blink in from Twig, but a little wide right on the drop kick. Solar Patrol still going to eat half his HP for his troubles and lose his blue as Layers nor inbound were local. Layers going to show up to just get a little bit of this jungle farm when he can. But Solar Patrol left on the island for now, as inbound is on this left-hand side, potentially looking for Netrioid. Stun is in. And good patience on this Ragnarok, going to get the ult and the beads. Love that play from inbound.
Yeah, I mean, that is glorious. Netroid thought he was reading the situation a little better. Now this is where the aggression can really come through. I was a little worried, if I'm going to be honest. I'm looking at a level 4, just turned level 5 Fenrir, going into level 6, level 7s on everybody else on the other side. That's usually a recipe for disaster if you try to find an ult. Even on people who don't have beads, the follow-up, the damage that you're going to end up eating is going to end up being a little too much. But I think good pressure for him, at least to get the ult out over there, allows them to see what they're doing now, push up against the tower line, get some control back in the duo lane, but he might need to alleviate some of the pressure over there in mid.
Wow, normally you see community bingo cards for Worlds games, but if there was one for these group stage games, this might have been one of the squares. A support not buying tank boots is something we haven't seen in a long time. It's the cooldown boots pickup for Genetics.
At all this year? I don't know that anybody's actually gone for anything else. Maybe the rare instances
one or two
of some like an occasional lifesteal boots, but cooldown. Right. I mean, I kind of like it. Like theoretically, hey, your coerce is up a little bit. Something I never note about coerce outside of all the obvious great things it does for you. Also has a little heal on it, which is nice. That comes through, but also
feels
more
good.
hammers, which means more aggressive, which means theoretically more setup for Sunders that are upgraded, 20% more damage. I just feel like Genetics is playing this in a way that is going to allow and really enable them to continue what we saw in that first few minutes, that absolute hyper-aggression. Granted, none of it has existed for the last few minutes. I mean, they've been trying to get aggressive. They just haven't been able to find the kills off of it.
Camelot King's trying to stay aggressive on this right-hand side, but this time Layers on time for his blue buff, so will be secured by Solar Patrol. So far, the Kings have really slowed this pace down, as have the Scarabs. They seem pretty willing to play it nice and slow at this point. You heard the desk talk a decent amount about how the Kings scale very well into the late game because of their potential objective play. But I look at the Scarabs roster in terms of their team fight come late game, and I like their odds there as Twig gonna blink in, find the drop kick, but Baronic is here. It has those Tycho drums. Stun is good onto the Gilgamesh, and Baronic is gonna put the Solar Scarabs on the board. Their first kill just shy of 8 minutes in.
And honestly, that is the true strength, I think, of this Fenrir. Ragnarok is such a great ult, and like you said, it forces beads and a lot of different play styles from the other team. But I think that stun has been more devastating lately than anything else. I mean, you go out into the jungle, you get a couple smacks, you get your runes up, and that setup potential has been forcing just the same amount of beads and winning a lot of engagements. So I like seeing that inbound's getting aggressive with it and being able to lock it down. And like you said, Genetics, Twig, eventually Variety, whether or not that comes in the form of a gank over to the solo lane or in the team fights, all of them are going to end up eating that stun for the brunt of its duration. They don't have a choice about it.
And you're always going to be able to get some pretty good follow-up off of it, whether it be Ragnarok or Brutalize or just some Seething Howl enhanced auto attacks. They usually end up doing pretty well for you. Both supports heading back over towards the duo lane side now as Statman, despite that early first blood being the victim of it, has not fallen too far behind Netrioid in this lane. Pretty even in where they are both in XP and in itemization.
I'm just so curious about Genetics right now. He's going in. He just used his Sunder. He wants this fight.
Well, he saw Baronic use the leap, so he's going to try and keep the pressure on. Genetics trying to do it all by himself, but he's missed the jump in. Stun is still good onto inbound, and Genetics going to give that up. But here comes Layers coming from the right-hand side. Skewer slow is solid, and here comes the Ragnarok ultimate. Genetics jumps away, but forced back by Zatman's training exercise. Baronic going to grab his second, but inbound gets pinned up against the wall, and he's going to fall down as well. Baronic finds a second, and Netrioid showing no fear, but maybe should have shown a little bit of fear as he goes down. Now it's just Big Man Tings up against Zatman. Merlin up against the Chiron. Who will come out on top? Not good enough on the auto attacks from Zapman. Double kill for big man Tings on the Merlin.
So, to throw that out there, 1 kill in about 8 minutes.
Yes.
And then 8 kills in about a minute and a half to really roll out for these teams. I mean, absolutely escalating it. And technically, the Kings get to come out on top because of that final trade. You get Tings getting 2 kills. Must feel nice for them. But it still feels a little weird. Like, Genetics jumps in way before there's anybody else there, drops the stun and the Sunder before anybody's nearby. Then most of the time that Sunder's sticking, he's transforming into a dragon. So, like, there's a lot of, I would argue, lost DPS from the Kings to maybe make that go more in their favor. But great rotations from the Scarabs, albeit maybe not exactly what they wanted, to be able to clap back just as many times and find some kills. I love explosive fights like that. I'm not used to seeing them for another 15 minutes, but I'll absolutely take them around the red buff.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a fun one there. And you see the difference between the Merlin enhanced passive autos early on and the ADC autos for the Chiron just not doing quite enough damage onto Tings in order to win that trade. This is how the last fight started. Both supports heading over towards the duo lane. Maybe looking to be aggressive because here comes Twig. There's that drop kick, but he's knockback immune. Can't get him out of that giddy up, but he doesn't need the CC. He's got the damage without it. Inbound gonna bring a treat back into the middle of the tower. And Twig, undeterred by the tier 1 tower, is able to stand tall and still grab himself another kill. Both members of the duo lane of the Solar Scarabs fall, while the rest of the squad just content snatching up that red buff.
I was watching all of the icons on the minimap there in duo lane to see how they were trying to get Twig out of there. There's a minion wave on him.
Yep.
Layers is right around in the jungle. Like, you don't want to have to walk awkwardly around the purple buff where you're going to be vulnerable. Genex gave him the benefit of the doubt, came in, took a couple shots for him. Speaking of benefit of the doubt, Variety forces just ult away, but they're not going to let him out.
They shouldn't. Echo drums are up, and Variety's going to eat the brunt of them, but this is one tanky Osiris taunted in and knocked up. He's Sort of Gaia proc has already gone off, and finally the Scarabs whittle down this solo late Osiris.
Feels like it takes a lot to get that all locked in, though. Like you said, a lot tankier than maybe expected early on. Takes a little while, but still, a kill's a kill, and that's the credit they need. Unfortunately, a kill's a kill, and now Zap's in trouble.
Zap has found himself in a bad spot, but good patience and a missed hammer from Genetics might be enough to do it. Now Twig finds himself in the midst of 2, but he's going to look to trade it out up and down with the heroes landing, but still ends up falling. But Captain Twig able to trade out his life jungle for jungle.
I mean, I think we're going to see 2 games in this set that are going to be absolutely different from each other. And granted, there could be a third. I have no idea what that one's going to be like. But the first one, so far, is just a cluster. Everybody fight whenever you want, go wherever you can, look for blood. The second one's going to be a lot more methodical, and then we'll end up hitting like 20 minutes with no kills on the board. It'll feel very EU, or maybe the Scarabs will be hyper-aggressive. Something will happen there. And then if we go to a game 3, that one's a coin flip as to which you'll get. Maybe it'll be somewhere in between, but this is definitely something that is, I don't even want to say devolving. It is very calculated aggression. They know where they want to put their pressure, and they are not hiding it. They're not worried about it. They're not slowing down. If they think they can get a solo kill, they're going to rotate 3 people over, 4 people over, and they're going to do it.
Man, there have been so many individual fights to this game, and they've all been better than Mayweather Paul, so at least we have that going for us here in game 1 of this set. Camelot Kings have found themselves a lead so far in it, though. I mean, about 3,000 gold after all of these skirmishes. I suppose the fact that they're getting some of the more neutral objectives after the fact, or that they're the ones usually having the last member standing.
Yeah, I mean, last man standing, but also the Scorpions have gone their way up to this point. Maybe getting one here if they were able to stay as aggressive as they wanted. But no big Gold Furies, no big Pyromancers. Admittedly, this is a lot of similar to how the Scarabs played against the Dragons that first game.
SOT has been sundered, and now he's trapped in those winds. Variety's got a solo mission to try and find him as Twig survives with just a sliver of HP. Inbound himself was on the chase. And Netrioid is going to petrify the Fenrir before he can get back into the mid lane. Just 1 kill for the Kings that time around. Felt like it maybe should have been more, but SOT was able to slip the noose.
Now, this is something that is probably not going to come up, but I always feel like it's fun to mention when Medusa's involved. She can get her acid spray off of those statues, and so anytime they're left standing, if they are left standing for long, it's something that's actually going to be maybe beneficial for Netrioid, and another little space to just kind of create some damage that otherwise there might not have been the opportunity. But I don't expect that statue to be sitting there too much longer, Baronic. Somebody's going to walk by it. But they're going for a Gold Fury right after that Pyro. Nobody's responding.
No one's here. no one home from the Solar Scarabs. So the Kings walk right, get an objective, walk left, get an objective. And the Scarabs do not seem particularly interested in fighting. Take a look at these net worth charts on the bottom left of your screen. Big man Tings way ahead now on this Merlin, 9,500 gold, significantly ahead, about 1,000 up on where Baronic is.
And that's the highest that you have for the Scarabs as well. Like, I mean, he's a 600 on the next person that's up there, and that's his own team. So being able to have 1,000 gold, like, that is where things come into your favor. I mean, you're already looking at kind of hovering around this 5,000 gold lead. It's just a little under right now, but neutral objectives are where these things matter. The Scarabs could win the next 3 fights, but if you know, with no Pyromancer, no Gold Fury coming up, cooldowns, depending on how they win those fights, maybe not really suitable to try and rush a Fire Giant, it's not going to be able to change a whole ton for them. So they're really going to have to kind of pump the brakes on the Scarab side, see if they can slow the Kings down a little bit, and then look to win these engagements around the Oni Fury, around that Pyromancer when it respawns, because those are going to be their big avenues right back into it.
Feel like Inbound getting a Sunder here at level 12 would also do a lot. I mean, you look at the
win.
Fenrir, I'm thinking about his primary targets. Netriot on this Medusa should just be food for the dog, but has not been the case, and I think a lot of that is because you need that upgraded Sunder in order to guarantee that you're out trading. We've seen Genetics use it very aggressively pretty well so far this game. Maybe that's where Inbound's going to go, but it is not. It's Thorns for him on the Fenrir instead.
That's going to be, I mean, he has been kind of the target of a lot, and admittedly, the way, the playstyle, hey, I'm going to jump into you as a group, I'm going to brutalize you as a group, I'm going to Ragnarok around your entire team. That Thorns should help alleviate some of that pressure, especially if he's able to get off the horrific beforehand. That's going to be some survivability built in for him. The problem is the survivability isn't really going to be a problem unless he's in there, and they haven't really been on the aggressing side of things lately.
Not lately, because the Kings have just started to group up and take what they please, very royally, I might add. It's the tier 1 tower this time around in mid, with Variety being there first in order to help facilitate that. Variety loses his Gaia proc because of Solar Retroll's aggression. But on this left-hand side, it's Zapman who is in trouble, barely able to escape, but he holds on to both relics, cost Genetics both of his. It's Blink as his second option, not usually what you see from Fafnir, but made it look pretty solid there. SOT still knockback immune in the midst of that Blade Storm, and Captain Twig is a little bit too early. Now Layers is here to spring the trap, but Twig's got his beads and is still able to leap away. Baronic and Inbound on the way to support the rest of the Scarabs, and BMT's gonna get picked up. He loses his Purification beads as well, as the Scarabs have finally hit the gas, but here come back the Kings, but Baronic flattens Twig for daring to walk back into the engagement. Now up into the Taiko drums, big damage raining through the back line of the Kings. Genetics now the only available target for Baronic, and he'll claim that one easily. Double kill for him. SOT slices down the Fed Merlin in the mid lane. Arthur on Merlin, violence underneath that tier 1 as all of a sudden the Solar Scarabs have woken up.
And that's that team fight you were talking about earlier, or it just looks a little cleaner overall for the Scarabs. Like Medusa, again, theoretically at this point 3-1 and 4 is going to be controlling the duo lane, maybe still an item to wait for Zapman to really come in and start punching back as hard as we're seeing out of at least Netrui, especially with a 2-level deficit. But everybody else in this game, save for the duo lane, has had a lead pretty much the entire time for the Scarabs. Inbound just now kind of taking over in that regard as well, so you're getting a lot of good damage. We know that Raijin's going to bring a lot to a team fight. We've seen it so much over the last few weeks, to the point where a couple weeks ago, he was one of the most banned gods that we had, and there's something to be said. Twig specifically has gone for a much more damage-oriented build, as opposed to the hybrid or even just warrior-focused tank build that we've been seeing out of him out of Gilgamesh specifically out of the last few times. And so his setup style play isn't as easy to pull off. You jump in, yeah, the damage is going to be there. You can look to get some kills. He's got 3 online, but you're not going to be able to find much else.
And look, I mean, clearly the focus from the Kings has been the duo lane. Genetics has been all over Zapman in this game.
Yeah.
But look at what's happened on the right side of the map for the Scarabs. A level and a half lead for both Solar Troll and Layers. It was just 2 levels a little bit ago before they had to reset. They've been sitting at level 18 for a while now. Those 2 in particular have really gotten off to a great position now in this game, despite the Kings really maintaining control up until this point. The Kings still have the lead.
Yeah.
The Scarabs looking to change it now with this Pyromancer getting a little bit of gold in their favor. Of course, the Kings are local, and the Scarabs will confirm it even with that Gilgamesh ultimate over the wall.
And that's what I was alluding to earlier, where the Kings, because they have that lead, even though the Scarabs were able to win all of that, they haven't taken full control of this game. That is a great fight, and they have a lot of avenues for success still. But these neutral objectives are very important. They get one that chips away a little bit, but this Oni Fury, maybe more important. It's going to help get that tower on left. That's immediate some gold in your pocket, but it's also worth some gold in and of itself. And this really gets to showcase the full 5-on-5, maybe for the first time, as long as they can get grouped up for it. And the way that they can play it, again, the team fight that I see, Inbound being able to get in there, maybe forcing Genetics asunder early or something like that, will make this a much easier team fight for them. Or even if Inbound consumes the Sunder, if he's the one who gets hit by it, at the end of the day, he pops his Thorns. Yeah, he takes 20% more damage, but you're going to get hit back by some of the damage that you're throwing at him. Might still cost him his life, but it opens up a lot of opportunities for SOT and Veronic and Layers to just live and survive and thrive.
Both solo laners very tanky at this point. I mean, neither mage chunking significantly, although SOT took a bigger hit there than Variety did, but also procced his Gaia, so we'll get a big chunk of that health back sooner rather than later. As you're right, Gore, this does feel like the first big 5-on-5 of the game. Variety a little bit behind, 2 levels that of Solar Troll. Can he make the same level of impact? As the King's not going to hesitate. Oni Fury down to 25 and dropping lower. Petrify going to be there to secure, and the Kings get the Oni Fury. Is Inbound going to jump in a little bit late? Eats about a half his HP in poke, a little bit less. And that's all she wrote. Scarabs not there in time to defend.
That's where, again, and I'm hearkening back to the Dragon set in Week 4, because this is very similar in my mind. You're taking on a team that theoretically is higher in the standings than you. They beat you the last time you played. It is not a difficult, or not an easy matchup for the Scarabs. And so you have to think of the parallels they've had. In that first game they played against the Dragons that day, they won a ton of team fights, and they'd had no follow-up for anything. They weren't able to get any of the objectives, so despite, I think, maybe even having more kills at the end of it, they didn't have the gold lead, and that's where I need to see this shift. They did it really well in games 2 and 3 of that set. I want to see them start that up now if they're going to be able to win.
Remember, Genetics, no beads, so that could be a target for this Ragnarok, but instead it's Variety. But Inbound getting a little bit too low. Winds of Shamash out in Kansas right now. No impact at all from that ultimate, but SOT's in the back line until Layers comes in to try and do the dirty work. Netrioid getting too low to stand until Big Man Ting's finally able to trade out his ADC for the enemy jungler. Twig looking to finish off Solar Troll, and he'll do just that as both right side members of the Solar Scarabs have fallen, but Netrioid did as well. 2 for 1 in favor of the Kings.
And I want to say SOT pulls the attention back of most of the Kings, makes it so the rest of his team doesn't fall. That's a big win, but it doesn't really create a lot of space. That being said, though, killing off Netrioid, of all things, Layers does a great job, because now there's no real Fire Giant opportunity for the Kings. And even if they were able to burn it down, which with 4 members, yeah, you should be able to, you really want it on Netrioid, so you're not going to go for it. Plus, there's still a Fenrir, there's still Veronic. You don't want to have to go into these odds when it comes down to trying to fight the FG. So they prolong the game. They keep themselves in it. But again, it's that 3,000 gold. Honestly, not a whole ton. It's a good lead for the Kings, but it's not the end-all, be-all for them, especially because the experience still matters right now, and that's tipping over towards the Scarabs.
It's a bit concerning to me, though, Gore, because remember, Solar Patrol and Layers were the 2 members of the Scarabs that had their leads, and they lost their 2-on-3 in comparison to what the Kings did. Variety and Genetics were the ones zoning the Scarabs backline, and they got no relevant damage in that fight and were able to be kept at bay. Theoretically, you would want SOT and Layers to be able to win that a little bit harder, but we'll see if they're able to do that this time around, as immediately back towards the Fire Giant the Kings go. They have dominated the ward vision on this side of the map. The nearest aggressive ward from the Scarabs is around their back camps. So not a lot of viable vision for them to understand what's going on. And you know that it's going to be difficult for the Scarabs to engage. Look at the beads cooldowns for them. 50 seconds plus on everyone for SOT, Layers, Veronic. None of them have their purification beads. Inbound goes in too aggressively. Ragnarok only going to find Genetics, and he's happy to be brought in towards the team because Twig was waiting for them. Winds of Shamash go down, and Layers did not get to press a button that fight. Inbound's one button he did press didn't do a whole lot of good either. those two both fall, and the Camelot Kings are going to stroll on over to the Fire Giant.
And you get a target, but like you said, is it the right target to bring to your team? Did not get a lot of damage done to Genetics, and instead get a Sunder dealt to Layers, immediately eviscerated what feels like the easiest Fire Giant post-fight for them. Kind of honestly felt like an easy mid-fight for the Kings as well. The Scarabs maybe not expecting to have to deal with that much. This is the moment where, like you had said, for Layers, especially at level 20 set, I expect to start seeing him flourish, start winning some of these fights if he gets into the backline a lot cleaner. But he has to get to the backline, and that fight did not give him any opportunities to even take a step forward.
Yeah, the only place he got to that fight was the respawn timer because it was quick. No relics available for him, and he's still on the respawn, 5 seconds, and the Kings have not shown signs of slowing down. Where did this right side Phoenix go? Crumbles like paper in front of that Coerce. And the Kings walk away with that right side Phoenix taken down. Still tier 2 towers in both mid and left on the Scarab side of the map, but that's for the future Camelot Kings to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, right now, they're not going for Titan. There's towers. They can worry about those later. Plus, they got that Oni Fury earlier, so that's probably where some of this pressure came from. Now they've got a lot of gold still in their pockets to spin. They went from what was about a 3,000 lead to almost 10,000 off of that push in those fights. And even though, I mean, you look at it, 4, 4, and 5, maybe not the best slash line there for Twig, 0, 1, and 3. If you're just looking at it KDA-wise, they're not necessarily glorious, but they're getting the job done. 4, 2, and 6, 4, 1, and 4 there for Tings and Netroid, so obviously things are going right for the carries. That's what you need. And it's just going to have to change. The way they engage, specifically maybe who they engage on there, is going to need to be a little more hand-picked, I guess, overall. Genetics is the easy target. He doesn't have beads. The only CC immunity he has is if he goes into his ult, and you have to, be ready for that. I think Inbound knows that, and so he is the easiest target. But he is also the most difficult, I think, for follow-up to kill him off, unless you have Zap, Layers, Baronic all on top of you at the time. So otherwise, maybe trying to just burn the beads. Right now, Twig doesn't have his for another 20 seconds, but it's those little windows that are going to make the big difference for you and make those opportunities for the Scarabs really shine.
It's unfortunate because this is what the Scarabs have kind of dealt with throughout this year, where they have these really good early to mid games, some good late game team fights. It's just they still make the one fatal mistake a little bit too often, and there it was trying to take a fight where your carries didn't have enough relics, where Layers had no relics available, and he's the guy that has the proverbial ball in this game. Here we go, left side Phoenix Siege. Wave in about a minute 20 on this Fire Giant for the Camelot Kings, so they have time in spades. Good poke on a Baronic. That took about a chunk of a quarter of his HP. As the Phoenix Siege going well so far for the Kings. They are not committing heavily, just waiting. Using that Coerce cooldown, letting Netroid use those extra attack speed Viper shots as well. Hit him a couple times, back it up. And that continues to be the call. Now Twig blinks in, drops the winds of Shamash, and that doesn't do a whole lot for them as he immediately backs up. Chiron ultimate puts some good damage onto the backline. Zapman does so, but not a lot of damage in order to force them to retreat. The Kings are happy to stick around for it.
Yeah, this is actually the go button. Now that the ult comes through, team-wide Coerce.
That's exactly what Genetics is going to look for. Into the backline, Inbound goes, and he's going to pick up Netroid, but the beads are good. Inbound might not be able to get back to the team, but barely escapes until Variety is looking to chase him down. Layers has hunted down the Medusa on the back line, and he's going to back it up underneath the Phoenix. Without that Medusa, this Phoenix Siege becomes significantly more difficult for the Kings, who got about half the HP of the Phoenix initially, Gore, and since have not done a whole lot to it. But they're still here, haven't retreated until now.
Yeah, backing off, like you said, it's just going to be too difficult for them. That's a great kill, not only for Layers to get up, but for Inbound to not go down. Variety just narrowly misses, which admittedly is probably juked out by Inbound more than Variety missing on that one. So well played from the Scarabs to defend on the Phoenix. That's the start that you have to be able to make, right? Make sure that they know they can't just outright win every fight. You did lose beads and ult there for pretty much everybody. I mean, you keep both relics there for Baronic. But now Layers, Zapman may be a little more cautious over the next couple of minutes as they wait for those respawns or those cooldowns to come off. They have a lot more potential, and they showcased it right there. Layers can get to the backline. Layers can absolutely demolish somebody. That Void Shield pickup took a little while to get it online. The gold wasn't necessarily flowing into his pockets the way he would have liked, but it's just enough to be able to keep him alive, as well as his starter upgrade coming through, being able to jump into the backline and even more so help out in these late game fights where you, like you said, want him to be controlling pretty much the majority of it. He's the one you're playing through. It's going to be a massive change for the Scarabs as long as they can set this up properly.
But they've weathered the storm. I mean, the right side Phoenix
that was the hardest
part. Exactly. They got through the hardest part. Left side Phoenix still standing. Right side Phoenix has respawned. Only one fire wave left on that right side of the map, and Baranic's going to be able to absorb that easily. Scarabs, despite that mistake in mid, did not lose off of it. Bend but not break has really been the motto, I think, for this team. And that continues here in the most important game of the year for them quite yet. Remember, if they win this set, they eliminate the Camelot Kings from the Phase 1 playoffs and go in their place. The Kings need a win badly. You can tell that the gravity of the game, I think, is starting to take hold.
And that's the heaviest note. The Scarabs have had a lot of 3-game sets. They've won even when they've lost that first game. All they have to do is win the set. As long as they can keep their mentals in the game, it doesn't always matter how this goes. That being said, you bet your ass they want to get this win.
Yeah,
you know they want to be able to go in there and find a huge W for them. So I'm really watching how they play this because this is where the adaptation has to come through. Fire Giants enhanced now. You get to determine, was it the eye of the storm that you're standing in and you just got hit by the first wave, the second wave is still coming? Or can you be your own oncoming storm for the Kings and put them on point?
Inbound getting whittled down by Variety, this upgraded Bluestone. Of course, that is percent HP damage that you're doing with it. Inbound has had enough. He's going to back up and receive a small heal from Zapman on the Chiron, then go to lifesteal off these back Harpies. Remember, Fire Giant is now enhanced as we're 31 minutes in. And that means the Kings' strength of their draft, burning the objective, does get a little bit more difficult. Maybe not. Look at how much damage they're doing, already down to half. Is Inbound going to jump in, finds a double stun. Netrioid has to use the beads already, and now SOT is going to separate the back line. Inbound will fall, but Layers is in, and he is unstoppable. That Kingslayer going to make a lot of space as Twig and Tings forced to retreat. Variety now left on an island in between his team and the enemies, but somehow manages to escape. Genetics tries to get his leap off, interrupted, but he too escapes for the moment until Layers leaps forward and skewers him to the ground. Layers and SOT do exactly what the Scarabs needed. 2 for 1 in the Scarabs' favor.
SOT's too low, though, to try and tank it up. I think they might have been able to trade that, but look how much time they have. 40 seconds without having to worry about it. There is going to be the resurgence. 3 members from the Kings still alive. That's a threat around a Fire Giant. Maybe not something that you're necessarily scared of, but it is something you have to be a little more wary about. Inbound's going to come up in 10 seconds, so if the Scarabs decide to rush for this, they will be able to get it onto Inbound, have all 5 members with an EFG. But Variety, the rest of the Kings, they're hanging around in this territory. You might need to win another fight.
Tings has no beads. Variety still has his. Twig, relicless, and without an ultimate. SOT not tanking the Fire Giant right now, instead trying to create space. But without SOT, they really don't have anyone who can tank it. And with that, Netrioid is back up. Genetics on the respawn. Scarabs won the fight, but not handily enough to get the EFG. So that makes me default immediately to the Relic situation, but the Scarabs should be feeling pretty good about where they are in that department. Baronic and Zapman pristine in the Relics department. Almost every set of beads is down on the other side, so that's something the Scarabs could at least feel pretty good about.
Yeah, a couple of Aegises that are going to come through. You get the Oni Fury, but that's the best sign for the Kings to be able to get aggressive here. You've got Inbound, you've got SOT trying to steal this away.
It's already gone. Kings already got the Fire Giant. They picked it up as soon as they heard that people were on that left-hand side and SOT couldn't stop him. But Twig went a little bit too far forward. He falls, but now Variety is absolutely decimating Baronic. Enough return damage from Zapman and Co. to force him back as Layers goes in, but this time bit off too much. Big man Tings gonna grab him and SOT. 1 for the road. Might as well make that a triple, bartender, as he's gonna take down Inbound as well. And this could be pentakill territory for Big Man Tings. Baronic low, but Netrioid's gonna grab it from him. And Big Man Tings just looking for the 4th, and he'll find it. It's a quadra kill for the mid laner for the Camelot Kings, and they are now just 1 game from going to the Phase 1 playoffs.
I mean, you get that Oni Fury, but that sound cue is just the wide open go button for the Kings. They knew exactly what they needed to do. Even still, the Scarabs, I think, put up a much better fight. The downside is Genetics had stuns, and that's almost all it came down to. Everybody that got aggressive, anybody that was in the way, he peeled for himself. I think he helped kill off Layers and Inbound in that with just the stuns. and managed to stay alive throughout all of that. I think just well played there by the Kings to be able to read that team fight and punch back about twice as hard as the Scarabs did. I think there was just a moment where they might have had an opportunity for that Fire Giant, but like you said, that fight is a little murky whether or not they won it well enough to actually move forward. We'll never get to know because now the Kings are standing up one game away from being able to move forward.
Kings up 1-0. I don't know, Gorm. Fafnir's seen him kind of good. He lets you burn the EFG. He then stuns the whole team for you and sets you up for a quadra kill there for big man Tings. 8-1-6 for the Kings mid laner. We'll see if he can reprise it as we get into game number 2 after, of course, the desk breaks down game number 1. We'll be right back.
She found a way into my heart. Oh, oh, she don't make up, no, she make art. And I need a way to treat it, cause I keep getting high off of her. Off of her. I know that you'd be bad from the minute I saw you. But somehow I keep running back to you. Back to you. Back to long nights can get me feeling lonely. Hey. And hearing music that can make me smile. But the way I feel with her cannot be explained. But one thing still remains on my mind. I know that you'd be bad from the minute I saw you. But somehow I keep running back to you. Back to you. I know that you'd be bad, bad, bad. I know that you'd be bad, bad, bad. I know that you'd be bad, bad, bad. I know that you'd be bad.
After a Game 1 win, the Camelot Kings on top of the Solar Scarabs, just one win away from moving on to the Phase 1 playoffs. And hey, if you're a Kings fan, maybe you're in the market for some new gear, and Insight Apparel Company will be the one supplying you with that gear. We've got hoodies, t-shirts, of course, the jerseys that you've seen all of our players rocking, all available at shop.smiteproleague.com, available in a cotton variety now in hoodies, and t-shirts. So thanks, as always, to Insight Apparel Company for furnishing our apparel for this year in the SPL. Taco joins me, though, to break down what happened there in game number 1. And Taco, this one felt like it had a lot of ebb and flow to it, didn't it? Where in the early game, there was one kill, things really slowed down for a few minutes, and then it got scrappy there for a little while. Kings had control, Scarabs felt in control, and ultimately the Kings will win it.
Unfortunately, Scarabs just getting a little bit squished by that Fafnir pressure. There is just so much benefit behind that coerce, and even if it's not necessarily the outright setup that Fafnir is able to provide, we saw big man Tings utilizing a lot of that initiation pressure early on, and it just transitioned so well for them into those mid-late game team fights. Yes, a disgusting amount of damage there. Zapman full-on bamboozled by that upgraded Sunder as well, because you expect a Sunder from time to time, don't get me wrong, but for Genetics to rush it right off the bat and then to get the ultimate level of return on it by finding that first split on Zapman, it didn't necessarily set the tone for this match, because we certainly saw a decent amount of pushback from the Scarabs, but a couple of things that I think really led to their downfall was just the fact that Zap didn't have crit. Nectroid had crit, and I don't blame Zapman for having crit. I understand his idea with that pen shred build, but when you can't actually burst an enhanced fire giant after killing 3 members from the Kings, where's the real advantage coming from? And again, it's not like they had a Fafnir of their own, because with Fafnir, Zap can get away with not having the crit. You don't necessarily experience the woes from that as heavily, but lo and behold, it just proved to be a little bit too tall of a task for the Scarabs to successfully burst that EFG, and that would have been their real comeback ticket into that game 1.
And Veronic felt like he looked pretty comfortable there on the Raijin. 25,000 damage. That's good for highest in the game. The Raijus were finding pretty good value as those fights built on, but Big Man Tings, Netroid, and then, of course, the front line for the Camelot Kings stood up to the task. So now you start to pivot the mindset towards picks and bans for game number 2 here. I think there's definitely a conversation worth having around the Terra versus maybe the Fafnir ban there for the Solar Scarabs. If you're in the background now, you're Slaney, you're talking the Scarabs through picks and bans for game number 2. Would you prioritize Fafnir instead of the Terra, you think, in that ban slot, or are there some merits maybe to both?
Based off of the Game 1 performance, I think it is preferable for the Scarabs at this point to just take the Fafnir out in place of the Terra, although I understand that the reasoning behind the Terra ban, at least in my mind, we know the Genetics is definitely proven on this Terra pick. It's been a long time comfort pick of his, even stretching back to his time in the amateur scene, but more importantly, Terra does have a lot of interrupt that is incredibly annoying for a Fenrir support to try and work into, so I get the idea behind it. I just think that at least for what the Kings were able to showcase on that Fafnir, it is certainly worth a ban, if not a priority pick.
Right. Yeah, it's an easy kind of hindsight is 2020 sort of question. You go into game 1 with a certain mentality, and then after game 1 goes the way it does, maybe we adjust some things around the second phase. The Scarabs team has felt pretty comfortable keeping the Ymir in that first ban slot. Remember, Giannis fell a little bit later in the ban column there as well. No changes, though. It's wild to me that Ymir continues to be this first and foremost, most prioritized ban, it seems like, over the last few days. Sobek then as well. Are you as surprised, though? I mean, look, we know that how powerful Ymir Wall is, right? I think most of the kit probably revolves around that, maybe in the ban column. Sobek as well, just what it brings you in that laning phase. Do you imagine we see a world where Ymir, Sobek start to get through here anytime soon? Are they on the back shelf through and through in your mind?
Maybe a little bit more of a later discussion for playoffs time, but I think you have to ban against what you know you're playing into. And in this set, we just know for a fact, and the Scarabs know for a fact, Genetics, he's a very proven and has an excellent Ymir. Even on the ping, it doesn't seem to bother him in the slightest, and I just don't think the Scarabs want to try and deal with a lot of the cutoff pressure that Ymir can provide in those elongated jungle fights as well. And I think more specifically, the fact we see Zapman leaning into the Chiron as well, and that is a nightmare to try and play into the likes of Ymir.
Yeah, it's a good mindset then for the Solar Scarabs. Keep that Ymir nice and banned out. And there is a slight pivot here. The Solar Scarabs take away the Fafnir, so it's going to have to be something different for Genetics here moving on into game 2. Remember, it was King Arthur first pick there for the Solar Scarabs. Actually, I mentioned this in the pre-game desk before we even got into picks and bans for this set. Tiamat makes her way through, so we'll get to that in a second. Is there any world where we start to see King Arthur or Cuchulainn banned out, or are you just giving up too much in your mind by banning one or the two or both of them out in that first wave?
I don't think any team right now would feel comfortable looking for a King Arthur or Cuchulainn ban in that initial 3 unless they intend and fully intend on first picking whichever one is left open. And that's largely just because of the fact that they're both such dominating solo lane gods at the moment, where if you can't have one without the other, or else you're basically forfeiting the lane pressure from the get-go. And I know that a lot of these teams don't want to deal with that. So for the most part, I definitely anticipate the things to kind of stay on course. Maybe that's a conversation that teams will look to visit during that playoffs era, but for right now, I really like the direction of the adaptations from the Solar Scarabs. I say that until I see the Heimdall locked in.
So you like the
couple
Tiamat.
of question marks.
You like the Tiamat and not the Heimdall then? Is that what I'm gathering here?
Not as keen on Heimdall since his recent nerfs. He does have a good amount of survivability, and I think that Zapman for sure struggled a little bit with his positioning. Halfway between the fact that like Zap was a little bit too far forward at times with the Chiron last game, and then also there's just the fact that I think the Kings just had a really easy way to get to him in the back line between the Gilgamesh, Osiris, and Fafnir, so Heimdall might be able to cut a little bit of that positional pressure out just from what the Bifrost can provide. But the switch up for the Kings to actually take that Fenrir away from the Scarabs, it does put a little bit more pressure onto Inbound, because Inbound, I think, looks best when he can get a pick that he's allowed to just play super aggressive with.
Right, and I think then it's smart mindset here from the Kings. Let's ban out that Hercules that Inbound has looked so good on. Take away the Fenrir as well. We'll have to see where Inbound goes in the second wave of picks here. So now, in the next 2 bans for the Kings, maybe we wouldn't be surprised then if we see some Inbound-centric banning coming through. I think Yamoja's certainly found her way into Inbound's God pool here as of late, but Cuchulainn taken away. And so this puts SOT in an interesting position as well, where it has been Cuchulainn or King Arthur and then a sprinkling of tiered here and there for SOT. But it's not going to be the Cuchulainn to answer the pressure of the King Arthur here in game number 2 for the Solar Scarabs. And then Ares, what an interesting ban here for the Solar Scarabs.
I would imagine that for the Scarabs, or at least for SOT, he'd be more likely to lean into a tier selection here as opposed to a Sun Wukong or even a Guan Yu, just because that Fenrir Brutalize, Fenrir is able to follow Sun Wukong probably better than what other gods can pressure that type of solo lane. And you would imagine that Sun Wukong could be safe, but I just think that tier has a little bit more initiation setup, and I really want to see a big setup component coming through here for the Scarabs in their 4th, 5th picks phase, because Tiamat, Gilgamesh, Heim, yes, there's definitely some damage that can be brought from this top 3, but at the same time, it doesn't really flow super smoothly together. This is a little bit of an awkward execution right now.
This is interesting, though. The Solar Scarabs obviously sense that this Fenrir might not be in support for genetics. Solar Scarabs spend all 5 of their bans banning out genetics, and then there are a couple bans for the Kings that might be in genetics god pool as well. And then the Cerberus lock-in, so it's looking like it'd be Cerberus then in support, you'd think. Or are you not ready to put your money on that just yet?
No, I think it's definitely more prone to be Cerberus in the support role. I'm wondering about a Shingten, a Wheelish pickup here, because a Wheelish is something that I think is certainly in Layer's wheelhouse, and there's already a good portion of the initiation from the Kings coming from those leap-ins off the Fenrir and Cerberus, so that could have a little bit of shutdown factor. I also like the knockup from Heimdall and Tiamat, so there's some built-in group setup that the Solar Scarabs can kind of lean into, but it is a relatively risky pick. And Serket, I think, a lot more safe for sure, and able to certainly bring the damage.
So are we looking at Gilgamesh support then for Inbound? Because Solar Scarabs, look, they spend their last 2 bans. You think Serket support?
Serket support, Gilgamesh for layers, and a Camazotz could be for SOT. Gilgamesh could also be for SOT, but I think I'm a lot more inclined to believe that it'd be either Gilgamesh or Camazotz being swapped between layers and SOT, just because Serket is something that we have seen inbound run in the past, and I do think that it kind of fits his playstyle a little bit better than the Gilgamesh, because he's able to harass on buff pressure, he's able to harass carries in the back line, and he has a get out of jail free card for the most part.
We'll have to see then if that's how it breaks down in game. Certainly makes some sense the way you lay it out there, Taco. And now the Camelot Kings needing one more pick. Their mid laner gets locked in, and it is the Nuwa for the first time, at least in the group stages so far here in Season 8. And the Camelot Kings will give Big Man Ting something that he can execute on. Taco, do you like the way the Kings have rounded out their draft with a Nuwa in the mid lane?
It's definitely interesting seeing this Nuwa pickup here for Tings, but I like the idea that the Kings are pretty much going to know exactly where the Scarabs are at, no matter, or anytime after Big Man Ting hits level 5. We've definitely seen it more than one occasion in the past where players won't necessarily utilize this new wall as just that final cleanup crew.
Sure.
She also has a nice little initiation factor to her where she can get a decent damage application in those mid to late game team fights. She also does a great job at establishing vision for the entire team. The only downside to that is if Newall is forfeiting that ultimate in order to get some visuals going for the squad, she does leave herself fairly vulnerable. But I think this is primarily intended just to get away from the Tiamat, so Baronic isn't really able to find any sort of leverage.
Right, the self-peel utility of the new so important. In the last 6 games, we haven't seen Baronic on this Tiamat pick. Do you think Tiamat, that being said, is something that you imagine Baronic can play pretty well, and do you think Tiamat slots into the Solar Scarabs draft in an all-important game, too? They got to win here or else they're going home.
I think if Baronic wants to throw himself as a contending member towards some of these other mids in the SPL, this is certainly a character selection choice that he would like to prove himself with, and I think it's similar storyline to what we saw at the Raijin last game. Baronic, I think for what it's worth, despite his team losing, had a really nice showing on that Raijin. If he's able to get a repeat performance with the likes of Tiamat, that could be the lane pressure that Solar Scarabs need in order to have a little bit of better objective control, because they certainly struggled with their objective control last game. No Fafnir in sight, though, for the Kings, obviously. That might make things a little bit easier when you factor in that Tiamat split push potential.
I mean, there are 7 support bans, maybe even 8 if you look at the Cabrakan. It's do or die for the Solar Scarabs. Game 2, kick it off with Aggro and Gore.
Thanks, Dave. And Taco, of course. Game 2 about to kick off. And Gore, I gotta be honest, man. If I'm quadra-killing the enemy team, nearly penta-killing them, and they let me have that pick again, I'm probably going to it, but that's why Big Man Tings is built a little bit different. Had the option to go for the Merlin, but decides on the Nuwa instead.
It goes for it. It's the 5th first god that we've had this week, if that makes any sense. So the first new play that we've had, and this is the first time she's been seen in Season 8. Not a whole lot to go off of what she's going to be able to do here, but there are the basics. Prot Shred from her minions late game. That's going to be very, very, just a big nuisance, as well as the fact that she's going to be coming into this with, well, a very, very nice ultimate for your team. Deals damage to everybody all the time. Theoretically, hey, if you could still get a pentakill if you really wanted.
That's true.
Might just require
less exciting though.
Yeah, not as, well, less skill involved in it, but maybe more skill involved from the rest of your team to get everyone so low that you could press one button and get the entire team wiped.
That is true, I suppose. Remember at the beginning of Season 8 when Conduit Gem was a little bit better and Archmage's Gem was a little bit better, and everyone was losing their minds about how broken Nuwa was going to be. She's going to dominate pro play. Couldn't go a day on the SMITE Reddit without seeing a post about it, and here we are in June 13th to be exact, before we see a Nuwa played in the SPL. But wouldn't be surprised to see that Archmage's Gem still come out. Still all about those procs on the ultimate when it comes down to it for Nuwa. But I agree, she has a little bit more. She has a few more tools in the toolkit than people give her credit for.
And that's something. It's the same way I feel about Chang'e. Like, I personally really like to play Nuwa, but it's not something that I recognize when I do it that I'm not picking the best thing available for my team. And that's why I tend to stray away from ranked.
Inbound in layers here. Here comes the Blink Taunt. Gets both members of the enemy team, and that's both sets of beads, and it still won't matter. Layers gonna grab first blood as SOT nearly takes down Variety for what feels like the 3rd time already in this solo lane, but a great double taunt coming from inbound there sets up his jungler for the gank.
Now, again, this goes back to the conversation we were having before. First off, and I'll give the numbers for it, Zatman's 3 for 5. He's got about a 60% win rate with this Heimdall. I might have to hold that thought because Twig's in a little bit of trouble.
No mana available for him. Has the blink. I think he's out.
Yeah,
he is
there it
indeed,
is.
but still costs him his blink for a set of back camps. You can, what you were saying, Gordon.
Yeah, so about a 60% win rate here for the Scarabs. Loves this Heimdall, though, Zatman. So this year it has been one of the most banned gods against specifically him, as well as something that for a while there, like because he was meta, it made sense to try and control it. Makes sense to go back to that comfort pick. He plays it really well. I like that. You get inbound on something that's just as aggressive as the Fenrir, except maybe a little more tried and true so far. I really like the dual lane with the Scarabs.
Layers shows up on a side lane again, but this time it's solo side. No kills. Variety was aware of the potential with the blue buff coming up, but it doesn't mean he's going to be able to secure the blue for free. Here comes Twig, and he does secure it with that Unchained. No real attempt to fight because Variety is in trouble immediately inbound. Able to get on top of him again with that Cobra's Kiss, again forces out the Purification Beads. I think Inbound has cast Cobra's Kiss twice this game, and he's gotten 3 sets of beads for it.
I mean, hey, 3 for 3, that's exactly what you want, and that's what I wanted to see out of him last game. I think there was a lot of presence that Fenrir just wasn't able to bring, but so far he's bringing it here on the Circuit. A lot of the change-ups for the Kings so far not working out quite for them. But that's where I started to look at it. I wanted to find it out, because I know Baronix played this Tiamat a couple of times. We really like his Yanis. He's got a few other gods in it that he's been able to bring out and look good on. He is 0 for 2 on Tiamat games so far this year, so this one will need to be a little different for him. But this time around, I think just based on what I've said about the duo lane, the way Layers has been playing this Camelot's aggressive early on, I really like his chances of being able to change it around. I think his play on Tiamat has been very solid. It just unfortunately wasn't the team fights and everything they needed in those games. So I'm looking at the Scarabs being able to run the show for a little while. They're already up about 1,000 gold, and they haven't really done much outside of that first blood. That's going to make up for a little over half of that, but still, there's a lot that is going in their favor. Until Twig gets his ult, I think they're going to be feeling fine.
This has definitely been a good pace so far for the Solar Scarabs. Clearly undeterred by losing game 1, and that is something that you've been able to say about them since day 1 of this roster, that even when they start to fall behind, even if they start to lose, they will not shy away from the next game, from the next engagement. And I think that when you're a group of rookies, that's about as high of a praise as you can get, is that you don't play scared. And that has certainly been the call for the Scarabs so far. But can they do enough in order to punch their ticket to the playoffs? They now need to win 2 games in a row in order to get there. And this Camelot Kings composition feels like it's built to team fight pretty well towards the later stages.
Yeah, I think the grouping is going to be great. I mean, like, you look at Nuwa, she's got decent single target damage, but like, that's not the end-all be-all of it. I think, yeah, it comes down to that team fight where she's going to be in the mix. Fenrir's going to be an easy target picker for them. But same thing with Cerberus, like a lot of beads forcers on the side of the Kings.
Variety in trouble, but uses the ultimate nicely to avoid some damage, but I don't think it's going to be enough. Winds of Shamash and the Bat Out of Hell combine to take down the soul laner of the Camelot Kings. Variety, even with the tank boots, cannot withstand the onslaught. Solar Troll has really done a great job of bullying him all laning phase.
I mean, this is something that I wanted to see. It's kind of what we wanted to see out of the Scarabs last game, and that's the thing I wanted to give them a lot of credit for, kind of going back to what you were saying just a second ago, but they're not just good at maintaining their mentals from game to game. They're really good at adapting from game 1 to game 2. Not just ready to get back in the fight, but to take a better fight and really put themselves in a better position. It's what they did against the Dragons. It's what they've done countless times. And I'm excited to see here what they're able to do against the Kings, because like you said, at least this early on, they feel to be able to control it. And everything we've said about the Kings draft and late game team fights, things like that, we were saying about the Scarabs draft last time, and it didn't make much of a difference there. I'll have to see if it helps them out this time.
Captain Twig looking for a target. He will get Baronix, and Baronix had beads that entire time, didn't use them until the very end, and then is able to jump away. So I suppose it's all the same. But I think Scarabs fans a little bit more white-knuckled than they would have been otherwise.
Look, it wouldn't be a Scarabs game if the Scarabs fans didn't have their heartstrings being played with constantly.
Sure.
Right? I mean, they've had some of the most intense Titan fights. They've had some of the most intense moments like that where you're stressed out for it, but also good moments like this where Inbound can just go in for free.
Inbound wasn't looking for Tings. He'd already used the beads. It's Genetics who has that last breath ticking down, but it's not going to get it. In fact, it's big man Tings on the Shining Metal that ends up getting the kill. Genetics ends up having just enough survivability to withstand that Circuit ultimate.
And Genetics is hanging around. He's looking for more with his team. Twig looking to get aggressive against Layers. And with Variety here, they might be able to do something, at least strip away some of these camps.
Ironic.
The way they are playing this, at least from the Kings in that engagement, was kind of recognizing the telegraphed nature of the Scarabs. They know what Inbound's trying to do now, and admittedly, it still works. Beads are down for both Kings and Genetics, but it does cost him his life this time around as opposed to what he was getting away with early game.
I think it speaks a lot to the impact that Inbound can have on the Circuit and, of course, the Heimdall, though you see Genetics pick up the Purification Beads. Even against a jungler that has no hard CC. Tiamat has the CC, but it's pretty difficult to confirm. I think it's really about the CC that this duo lane has as to why we see the beads pick up here from Genetics. And as you highlighted, they are down for the next 93 seconds. Ting's only a second ahead of him when it comes to that cooldown. Certainly a window now for Inbound to be aggressive. No blink for 60, but his ultimate is up soon.
Being able to just jump in. I mean, Circuit has enough gap closers that, without blink, you're maybe not going to be able to run the show, but you can still get right in their face immediately. That's something I think you need to be worried about. That last breath, being able to go in and just grab someone's shoes, especially if they don't have beads, for them to just join a fight that they wouldn't otherwise want to. Plus, true damage feels really good as well when you're playing a support. I mean, all of this is going to just stack up into some bad matches for the Kings, and for Tings specifically. Unless he's able to get a really stellar stun off prior to getting grabbed, as long as his beads aren't up, he's a pretty free target.
Well, remember that game one had a pacing very similar to this, Goremizer, where it was a little bit of action early, and then a big lull in the middle, I guess at the beginning middle, and then all of a sudden it exploded. Lots of kills around specifically red buff invades on the Scarab side of the map. This Kings roster, I don't know if they invade quite as well as they did last game. Having something like the Nuwa in mid really incentivizes you to just play it out and wait for the late game.
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of the way the entire draft for the Kings feels like to me. Like, yeah, I mean, solo laners, you're always going to fight. This isn't a big surprise, but Twig, Tings, Genetics, Netroid, every single one of their picks just feels like it's something that wants to wait for that full 5-on-5 grouping. Some of these 3v3s are going to be interesting for them, but it still feels like you want another person in the engagement, right? Like, Tings is going to do decent damage, Twig will do decent damage, and it's good for ganks.
Zapman, speaking of ganks, in one right now. Here comes the Fire Shards to help out. As Zap doesn't have the Bifrost available, had not placed his portals correctly, and Twig is able to capitalize easily on that Fenrir. And Gore, what surprises me is that he should have had vision. He had that sword up that gives you vision in the area. Felt like Zap could have maybe known that gank was coming a little bit sooner.
Unfortunately for him, again, no Aegis, nothing to really do about it, right? He does whatever he can. Maybe it comes down to, like you said, Bifrost placement. I think the last time I saw them outside of where they are currently in lane, they were at the purple buff of the Kings, so he was definitely playing aggressive. And that might be what comes back to bite him. But at the end of the world, or end of the day, it's not the end of the world for him just yet. Both 0-1 and 1 for the Hunters, both level 10. It's not going to give Netroid a massive lead because he had to back off of that anyway. This is where those moments start to kind of break true. And there's technically a tier 1 item up for Zapman right now. So he's going to be feeling pretty confident about that. This is another duo lane as well. Like, not just for the Kings that want to play it slow, but I don't know that we're going to see much out of the duo lane unless a gank like that happens. They are not going to be able to find kills onto each other easily.
No, that's a lane that probably is going to feature quite a bit of farming on both sides as the Kings get aggressive around the Pyromancer. They grab it, but here comes the Blink directly onto Tings. And remember, his ultimate is down. Where is he supposed to go? It comes up in time, but not in time enough, as Inbound does claim the kill, but Baronic brought underneath the tier 1 tower. Stun is good, but he is surviving a little bit longer than the Kings can be ready for. Eventually, Variety slices him up with the Blade Storm, and it's 1-for-1. Both mids end up falling.
Well, Zap comes over there and gets involved, but ultimately not able to find much. The downside is going to be where Netroid is now laying in wait. There's a sentry ward right there, so that should help spot out where inbound is.
Zap's got someone on a ride. Yeah, it's Genetics. He'd already used that through the realms of Genetics. Beads is on the way back down. In comes the taunt. Snipes coming through from Netrioid, and with the help from Big Man Tings, is able to trade for support once again. Feels like every time a team gets a lead, they're able to bounce back, but what a knockback coming from Zapman. Forces Twig back. Solar Patrol can't quite capitalize, and that should be all she wrote. It's back and forth here, Gore. Mid for mid, support for support.
I mean, that's, if I'm the Scarabs, I'm really ecstatic about that because you're maintaining, albeit a small lead, but a lead nonetheless. That's going in your favor. Gold Fury is the big point of contention right now. Both of these teams are in a prime possession, prime teams to be able to burn it down. Maybe not as fast as what we saw last game, since there's not going to be any coercion coming through from something like a Fafnir. No Merlins either to help burn it down a little quicker.
True.
So it is going to slow the pace down, which opens up opportunities for both the Scarabs and the Kings when it comes to steal potential. Then we get into this murky water of who's going to be best at it. Honestly, I like the Chiron's options a little more, but there's so much on the table that as long as they can keep it going 1-for-1, eventually it's going to eke out in favor of someone. Unfortunately, again, the Kings' team comp feels like it's going to be able to take some of these fights a little bit better. But Layers was a wild card last time. I think this Camelot is always a wild card, easily able to dive into the back line. Tiamat is a lot tankier than you think when you decide to go in on her, and so I think this is going to be something that's going to come up kind of big for the Scarabs.
Twig has his blink available if he needs it, but he won't. Layers gives up the chase as his blink wasn't up and ready to go. Twig able to sneak away that Scorpion from the Scarab side of the map, as Inbound is perfectly happy to sit here and make sure that Netrioid doesn't get the farm. Netrioid going to use the ultimate because he really wants the farm, but he won't be able to stop Zap from getting this tier 1 tower. Now that he has Genetics as a helper, is willing to step up before he takes a chunk from Zapman and immediately decides that maybe that wasn't his best idea. All of that pressure on the left-hand side is going to become valuable here, Gore, because red buff is coming up, and the Scarabs are here in force. Remember, Netrioid has no ultimate, and Inbound's looking for him. Blink Cobra's Kiss doesn't find a home, but will turn his target back towards Genetics. Now that Twig and Tings have showed up, looks like the Scarabs have lost their appetite. Red buff secured by the Kings.
That was dangerous territory. Both these hunters still have their beads, so a good fight for them doesn't necessarily matter, but they're 13 and 14, and neither have gotten their second relic yet. I think Netroid, that's going to be coming up soon. Zapman, that's coming up right now. And while his is going to be on cooldown for that Aegis, it's those moments.
Inbound, picked up, stunned again, and taken down. It's Big Man Tings who gets the final blow with that Shining Metal. Variety there to assist. And Inbound, without being able to get that ultimate off, ends up falling.
First time we can really say this game, although it's been close enough to this already that we might have been able to say before, but even pretty much through and through, golds right next to each other. It's going to fluctuate from wave to wave depending on who gets the last one that you see. Towers, it's only going to be one fallen there, left lane. Zapman was able to take that, and that's the only significant difference in the state of the map right now and with the state of the team fights. But little picks like that on the Inbound, I think, are what open up the Kings to find what could be more success. Again, if they continue finding little picks like that, or even 2 picks, 3 picks like that, it's going to spiral rapidly out of control with the way their team comp is built. Scarabs Inbound is like the driving factor for me. I think him and SOT are going to be the ones who determine every single fight. How they engage, how they live through these engages, and who they grab with their engage is going to be the only 3 factors that really matter. The follow-up's going to be guaranteed, and it's going to be good. We know that much. It's just whether or not Inbound is able to get the right targets.
15 minutes in, and we're all even, but Scarabs might be changing that now. Nice ultimate from Solar Trolls. Going to force back Captain Twig as Genetics picks up Inbound instantly. Nice double stun coming from Tings. But Layers goes in, gets up, or so he thought, into the bat out of hell, but Captain Twig yanks him back down to earth. Cirquette going to fall as well. 2 now in the Camelot Kings' favor as Variety surges forward. Zapman and Baronic on the way out. Solar Troll still hanging around. Remember, the Scarabs have Oracle Vision on this Gold Fury, but they won't have the means to stop it. Kings grab the first real lead of the game now, up about 2,500 gold.
That's going to be something that, again, it's going to be a little more dramatic overall. Last game, we didn't have a massive lead for the Kings, but they still controlled a lot of the pace of the game for it. This time around, it waits until about 16 minutes. They'll at least even up the tower numbers here, maybe even more so depending on how those minions on right end up trading. That's going to set them up for some, not wild amounts of success, but enough that they're going to be able to get some good buys off of this one. If you're Tings, you're waiting until you can upgrade your starter. Right now he's level 16, so he's still got 4 levels to go before he can even think about it. But that's where some of the big power jumps we've been seeing for those new walls, at least earlier this year, were. Right now he's got everything that you would want. You've got the cooldown and the Chronos Pendant, you've got the Soul Gem for some survivability. And it's worked for him most of the part. Now it's just going to be engage, engage, engage. Who's going to choose fights? How are they going to choose fights? Layers gets in a little too aggressive inbound, I think, as well as SOT. Maybe think there's more going on for them than they have in that fight, and they end up kind of getting enveloped by the Kings. But I like that they haven't slowed down at all. In fact, they kind of recognize it. They can't afford to fall behind here. One game for the Kings, one win, one really good team fight here gives them a Fire Giant, sets them up for much more success at the end of the game. So the Scarabs have to be proactive. They can't really sit on their laurels, and they don't have many to sit on anyway. They need this win to even out the set, so they have to keep all of that in mind going forward.
Not in a good situation, though, for the Scarabs as they lose this Tier 1 tower on the right. Big man Tings now has a full item over Baronic. Remember, that was a lot of last game, was that Tings had a big lead over the Scarabs mid laner. Seems to be the case here once again, though. I imagine Baronic's got some golden hand to be able to back up and buy something for himself, but certainly not a full item. Yeah, 1,500 should be about a tier 2 of whatever he needs. But on the other side, Tings is nearing that critical mass point. Charon's coin done now. I imagine Rod of Tahuti should come last, give him 10% more pen and that passive that Nuwa loves, making sure Fire Shards is able to get a lot of damage off. He'll use it here as a scouting mission, and of course, more importantly, to pad those damage numbers.
Oh, well, and this is where the wording and like the terminology in the game comes in handy so much in favor of Tings. Because that's kills or assists that get you stacks. And guess what Nuwa's really good at getting for free? Assists. So you already got 5.
Zapman stops Netrioid in his tracks, and that's the beads. Coming from the Chiron, he needs this kill, but Genetics ends up with it. So Netrioid is dead to rights. Slayer's going to be able to grab himself his 3rd, but here comes Twig looking to chase down that jungler, winning his 1v1 to the top left, and he'll find his 3rd in a row. 3-0-3 for the Fenrir, and now the attention turns to inbound. Full runes, full stun, see ya later. Double kill for Captain Twig as he is on a rampage now. 4-0-3 for the King's jungler.
I mean, we were back to the conversation of 8 minutes ago where it was at least going to be 1 for 1, hunter for hunter, things being even. That's exactly what you want if you're the Scarabs. Maybe not exactly. That's the best case scenario for you in that fight if you're the Scarabs. Now you lose 2 more members. You lose another tier 1. They're looking to continue pushing at least the wave, but maybe even the tower at this point. They know there's not much for him to grab on this map, or this side of the map, and running to the Fire Giant's going to take too long. They're going to have some damage. I don't know, even with the minion wave, if it's going to be enough, but I guess with Twig, we'll be able to find out.
Not quite enough. They decide to give it up.
It's going to get low, though.
Yeah, about half HP remaining, a little bit less on this tier 2 tower on the left-hand side, and only tier 2 towers remaining for the Solar Scarabs on their side of the map. On the other side, the Kings have only lost the dual lane tier 1 and a little bit of damage on both other tier 1s, so certainly in a better spot on the map. And all of a sudden, this game went from slow-paced, trading 1 for 1, oftentimes same role for same role, to now Kings favored in a fairly quick amount of time. 15 minutes in, entirely even. Now we're 20 minutes in, and it's a 5,000 gold lead, nearly 5,000 experience in favor of the Kings.
Most sets against the Kings the last 2 weeks, this Fenrir has been banned, and for good reason. Twig's 4-0-3, right? I think he's showcasing exactly why. It's this Fenrir, this Naja lately he's been loving so much, and Fenrir, I think, going to just fit better in when you have a Nuwa as opposed to something like a Naja that really fits with Big Man Team's Raw, things like that. But the way he's playing this showcases why it was in the top 3 bans for a lot of teams when they went up against the Kings. It was really a detrimental impact to the Kings. And right now we're getting to see him kind of run away with it as it's going. Layers has had a decent performance, but not at the same level that you would really like to be able to clap through. Same thing for Zap, and right now inbound. I mean, he's 1 in 5. The dual lane, even off to a better start this time around in terms of at least beads burning potential. Hasn't quite been able to get their grip on some kills, and Zap, unfortunately, has had a little more of a lackluster set so far.
looking to turn it around here. They need him. Primal Fury spawn. Genetics going to take a small bit of poke, but a big stun coming from Twig. He gets drop kicked out of range instantly as Tings' fire shards force the Aegis out from Zapman. Good damage coming from Netriud's ultimate as well. Twig immediately into the back line. He picks up Zap, gets his beads. Now Zapman, no ult, no relics for this fight as Variety has taken over the zone duties. He's all the way in the Solar Scarabs purple buff territory, and every health bar shows some wear and tear for the Scarabs. The rest of the Kings are backed up. They take down the Primal Fury and are now coming to assist Variety on a potential dive. Remember, this work they did on the tier 2 tower and left could come and play now. Blink stun off the mark, and Genetics going to use the beads as SOT was looking to knock him back. Variety getting too low, though, and Layers is going to pick him up. It might be an overstep here for the Camelot Kings, but a good ultimate coming from Genetics was going to delay it for a little bit, but not long enough. Layers is going to find himself a triple kill. All of a sudden, the Solar Scarabs are able to turn it around. Twig tried to find one of the 5 members that was backing of the Solar Scarabs, but they all slip through his paws and they head over to the Fire
and
Giant.
I love this call so much. Just run it down. You know you have the damage. You know you have a little better secure. Genetics is going to be a problem. It's a little over half health. Twig's going to be a problem just in general, but also around this FG, something they're going to have to worry about. But this is a good advantage for the Scarabs that literally exists only because of the way that fight goes.
Jump in from Twig, going to use the ultimate. He knows Zap is the target, bringing him towards Genetics, but that stun off the mark. Now the Scarabs are off the FG and looking for the fight, but Genetics able to sidestep that through the realms, and Twig still able to live for now, able to jump through that winds of Shamash, and now the Scarabs head back towards Fire. FG at about half HP, and it's Zapman tanking. Bing says respawn, and here comes Fire Shards. Good amount of damage onto the entirety of the Scarabs, and they are taking lots of damage from this objective. Zapman on the fire wall as the fire finally falls. Zapman on a sliver of HP, the magic pixel for the Scarabs ADC, but all 5 members survive with the FG. Scarabs back in game 2.
And now you see the magic of Aussie too. Gets to walk away with full health. They get themselves a Fire Giant. They're not poised to pick up anything afterward just yet, but that is the best spot and the best position they've been in pretty much all game, floating around even at best. Now they're still a little behind in gold, but that's going to change. Fire Giant knocks down towers. There's a lot of gold on the map for them to shift things back in their favor. I want to run it back to the fight they won, though, because that's where things really, I think, just change pace. First off, it's a dive under a tier 2, but it's a 4v5 because Twig goes for this really long loop around, and then he doesn't commit to the loop around and starts running back. He spends 3/4, if not more, of that fight nowhere near where the rest of his team is. So while they had such good control around the Primal, they lose almost all of it the minute they go for that tier 2, and the Scarabs appropriately react to that one. Layers with a triple kill, now being able to go up from what was 3-2 to 7-2, 4 kills in just the last few minutes, has been a very big jump for him just after I had said that he wasn't having the performance he needed. Now he's finally hitting that mark, and this is a great spot for the Scarabs to fight back in this game.
Maybe it took the Scarabs a little bit to wake up here in this game because they were busy getting into Layers' backpack. 7-2 for the Camazots in this game. Every other member of the teams, KDA not looking so good. SOT 005, Baronic 015. But the duo lane not looking great. 7 of the 10 Camelot Kings kills are on members of the Scarabs duo lane. But all sins are forgiven if they can win this game. Tier 2 tower defense is where we stand. The Kings do not seem likely to give this one up for free. Beads are down for Layers. He just lost them. Minute 30 on those, and with him being the focal point of these fights, that ends up mattering quite a bit. So he's not here with the rest of the team. He's split off to the left and is escorting some Tiamat minions down this left-hand side. Inbound playing free safety in between mid and left hand. It looks like Layers is going to get some good damage on this tower, but not for free. Twig is going to jump in, use the ultimate, uses the blink as well. Layers has to trade his ultimate in exchange, so now neither jungler has their ult.
Yeah, Layers survivability tanks now in terms of some of these late games. That's the thing that gives Camazot such prowess in the back line, and that's going to alleviate at least some of his split push potential. Him alone, that should be said, but the rest of the Scarabs are still really far pushed forward. Zap's been pushing up this mid wave, so they have some minions with him. Layers is over there with inbound. They have a minion wave going into that tower. A tier 2 is going to fall here. They just have to figure out which one. It looks like it should be left.
Layers is going to be able to walk in, this time nearly uncontested. Variety gets here, but far too late to defend. So it is one tier 2 that goes down. but only a minute left on this Fire Giant buff for the Scarabs. Remember, they have on all 5 members, so you know that they want to get a little bit more out of this. Worth noting that Twig's ultimate is coming up sooner than Layers. Twig with that full CDR. His is up and ready to go. Layers not quite as lucky, 3/4 of the way there, according to the Diamond. The mid-tier 2 has taken maybe 1 auto worth of damage from the Scarabs, and now they are starting to retreat, but the Kings don't want to let them off the hook for free. They are still surging as 5 down the mid lane. And with Primal Fury coming up, that's what I'm surprised about, Gormizer. The Scarabs aren't at least baiting back towards this Primal Fury and securing that for themselves. Now it's Kings with positional advantage around the next objective.
The good thing is they're a little scattered. I mean, granted, in a vertical line, really easy to collapse in on, but luckily the Scarabs are going to be able to come into this. But maybe they're going into a trap here. SOT seems far forward, and they've only got this Fire Giant for 7 more seconds. It's really about to drop off.
Big stun, though, from Baronic. That hits all 3 members of the Scarabs, or the Kings rather, that were there inbound looking for Netrioid, and he's going to get the beads out from the enemy ADC. Twig up in Ragnarok is a defensive measure, and that's enough to force the Kings back. You called it, Gore. Too easy to collapse on their formation, and Baronic in particular made him pay.
And being able to get, even if it's not a kill, you get 2 ults out of that one. You get the beads there from Netrioid as well. You're feeling much more confident. You have a little under a minute till that Fire Giant comes back. Those are going to be huge wins for you in a fight in that FG pit. And with the towers going down the way they did, yeah, it's not a massive lead. The Scarabs, it really is anyone's game. They lose a fight, they lose the game. Same thing can be said for the Kings, though, and that's the important note. 3 towers still standing on both squads. The tier 1 over there and right, maybe going to cause a little more trouble for the Scarabs than they'd like it to, but tier 1 at this point in the game, 28 minutes in, you just go knock it down if you want. They have enough damage that I think they could take a Titan without it. It's all up to this Fire Giant. It's going to spawn in about 10 here. There's a lot of pressure, I think, on both teams here, more so on the Kings. The fights from the Scarabs these last few times have looked very solid, whereas the Kings have been very disjointed.
Agreed, but big purchase in the pocket now for Big Man Ting as he has finished the Rod of Tahuti. Worth noting that after he hit 20, he did not go with Archmage's gem, actually electing for that Gem of Focus. Not usually what you see, but you can still just pop the fog, pop the minions, pop your Shining Metal in base, and then use your ultimate and get that extra damage increase, that % damage increase afterwards. So not necessarily a big mistake in my mind coming from Big Man Tings. As Gormizer mentioned, Fire Giant is the focus now. Looks like that is a Scarab Sentry ward in the pit. The Kings certainly have some good ward coverage on the sides. The thing to keep an eye on, of course, anytime Tiamat's in the game, is where these minions are, and they are on the left currently, but it looks like it's only 1 portal's worth. About 3 minions should survive in order to help on this push. That's not enough to get that Phoenix for free, and I don't think the Kings are going to have to respect that too heavily. Baronic has laid down some more portals, but they're in this right-hand side. Stun from SOT onto Genetics, but that's cleansed out by Netrioid. 8-1 of his own volition. They're coming from Twig, but not a whole lot comes.
They get that tier 1 tower, though. That's where a lot of that pressure comes from. Now, it's kind of equal footing in the Fire Giant pit. The Kings, as long as that tower is standing, technically have a little more wiggle room in this side of the jungle. But now that it's been knocked down, it's going to be all equal all the time. This is a separation that's going to be a little awkward, though, depending on whether or not Twig wants to keep getting aggressive, chase down Layers. Doesn't look like he's going to into that red buff. We saw that solo kill, like, what, earlier? 10 minutes ago at this point?
Yeah.
That really ended up paying off overall for Twig. And that's something that could go wrong, but with Baronic on this side of the jungle as well, at least we can say, don't go over there. Twig is going to need a little more ward coverage or vision coming through. Tings could maybe help with that if they need it. But it seems like the Kings, and appropriately so, are much more worried about this Fire Giant. Now, I'm also going to harken this back. Primal Fury was just taken by the Scarabs.
Yes.
Game 1, they went for an Oni Fury at one point in the game while there was a Fire Giant up, and that was the go button for the Kings. They don't have the same amount of burn on the Kings, but if 1 or 2 members of the Scarabs are not on this side of the map, if they do opt for a play like that again, it might cost them the game.
Cobra's Kiss does not land this time around from inbound, but neither does the Paralyzing Spit from Genetics. Tiamat minion check, 1 portal on the left-hand side coming for Baronic, but those minions are only about halfway up the lane, so again, not enough to pressure that Phoenix. This is definitely on the nice edge now as we've ticked over to 30 minutes. That Fire Giant now enhanced. Nice Cobra's Kiss onto Twig, and his Unchained is down. He'll eat half his health bar in damage, but Not enough to get the kill, but maybe enough to signal the go on the Fire Giant. SOT pulls it, then gets knocked up. That's his Gaia proc, and that could end up mattering in this team fight, but of course he won't take too much damage from it now. Fire Giant down to about half HP. Same could be said for inbound as Twig finds Layers. That's beads and ultimate expended by the Camazots, and Layers looks a little lost on where he's supposed to go now. Scarabs don't go back to Fire until they decide that maybe they should. Fire down, back to half HP. Twig in the mid lane, taking up some minions as Tings goes up. Gonna know exactly what's going on in the Fire Giant fight now as Fire's dropped to about a third. Zapman still on it, and inbound's already been erased. Baronic gonna try and secure this over the wall, and the Scarabs do. They grab the enhanced Fire Giant as SOT is trying to take down Tings in the mid lane, and he does so successfully until Netrioid gets his revenge. Layers still sticking around, but completely out of mana. It's up to Baronic and Zapman to do the damage, and it's a 3-on-3. Netrioid, Twig, and Genetics versus Layers, Baronic, and Zapman, and it looks like the Kings are going to limp away. The Scarabs walk out with 3 EFGs on their side.
Front lines down makes it a lot more difficult for the Scarabs to fight, despite all of the damage on their team. They're going to be going in. Ragnarok just came back up there for Twig, but luckily for Scarabs and Scarabs fans alike, doesn't connect on anybody, doesn't even burn the beads there from Baronic, doesn't have to sweat it. Relic situation right now is not looking too great if you're a jungler overall. I mean, beads still there for Twig. Also Undying still for Twig, but granted it's been at the cost of a lot of pressure.
Still going for it, the Scarabs. They have not reset. Instead, they're going to go for this mid-Phoenix blink in from Layers as he has the ultimate, but no beads. He does not get up into the sky. Netrioid shuts him down for his 3rd kill, and now it's Baronic and Zapman on the run. Genetics gonna blink past Baronic, and now Baronic in an awkward position. Still has the beads, and he'll use them, but Netrioid is on the charge. Baronic up and over the wall, gets slowed down by that masterful shot, and here comes Twig chasing with Genetics, but inbound has returned as the backup. He's gonna cut off the reinforcements that could be chasing down Baronic. Hasn't stopped the Kings quite yet. Stun lands onto the Circuit as this fight has gone for a long time. Nice drop kick, but Twig has been led right to Baronic, but there's not enough damage to take him down quite yet. Aegis is good, and a good stun on top of himself. In fact, it's 2 in favor of the Scarabs as the front line has been eviscerated for the Camelot Kings. Just Tings and Netrioid left standing, and Baronic is half HP, thinking, what are you fellas doing? Did you forget I'm Tiamat?
2 Phoenixes exposed, Zap's alive, EFG, Solar Troll, and Inbound are alive. I think you go for it here. I think you make the play. I mean, Tings, Netrioid, that's a lot of damage, but you've got 30 seconds without any backup for them coming through for the Kings. It's going to be a little more tough onto SOT's health bar here, but not enough to slow him down.
Mid-Phoenix already toasted. Zapman here and ready to go. No relics or ultimate for him. If Netrioid and Tings can get on top of him, but they have no front line to speak of, and Netrioid's charging into the back line. He cannot get his hands onto Zapman, and that is it for game number 2. The Solar Scarabs keeps their playoff hopes alive, and we're going to a game 3, do or die.
One more matchup. You have to figure it out. You have to change your draft, your play style. There's so many little moving parts in this one, but the Scarabs, I'm going to give them a lot of credit going into this. They are really good at adapting from game to game. They're going to even look at that one. They win it, but they're still going to be able to say, what did we do wrong? What can we do right? Why were we not in that game for 30 minutes? And what can we do to make it so that we don't have to like shake our collars out, feel sweat coming through? Like, how do we change that up so it's not all around a Fire Giant?
Look, the Kings were in a great position that game, Goremizer. They overextended twice, once after a Gold Fury and once after a mid-Phoenix defense, and they lose the game off of those 2 decisions alone. Now they've got to find a way to mentally bounce back. Remember, the Kings, despite their great Phase 1, are not guaranteed for the playoffs. They have to win this next game. They want to go to the Phase 1 playoffs, or else the Solar Scarabs are taking their spot.
And that is where things get a little shakier, right? I mean, you're looking at the Kings. This is a team that has been dominating so far this year. They've had a way better performance than anybody thought coming into it, and they are stumbling. And this is somewhere they haven't been tested as much. Are you going to be able to bounce back? The Scarabs have a ferocity that a lot of other teams really aren't able to tackle, so there's a lot more pressure on the Kings now.
I can smell the hunger from the Scarabs from here in the studio. You know they want this game 3 badly. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back breaking down game 2.
my neck and I just wonder why I'm buried in a suit I'd never buy, a suit I'd never buy. Cufflinks on my wrist, I can't act surprised when the shovels hit dirt in the earth. Did they start to cry? Since I was 17, I've been looking for a place to make me be complete. I've been looking all alone out there for anything to make me feel alive, bring me back to life. Cufflinks on my wrist, I can't act surprised when the shovels hit dirt in the earth. Did they start to cry? Since I was 17, I've been looking for a place to make me be complete. I've been looking all alone out there for anything to make me feel alive, bring me back to life.
And just like that, this week of Game 3s gets another. I think out of 7 games, we've now had five of them go all 3 games. And that's the type of action you get here in the Season 8 of the SPL, powered by our friends over at Alienware. So shout-outs to Alienware for providing us the assistance and bringing this awesome action to you. If you want to pick up some Alienware gear of your own, head on over to smitegame.com/Alienware and use the code SMITEAW. And you can game like our pros here. Make sure to follow them on Twitter and Instagram at Alienware as well. And join the global gaming community that Alienware has been putting together. And Taco is with me one more time for this set, one final. Oh, break down Game 3 after this, but one more time to break down Game 2. And Taco, this is one where the Scarabs are finally able to capitalize on some good pressure.
And I think that a lot of that just comes off the back of just Layers making his presence known very early on, gets a great punish in onto that duo lane, and that for sure set the pace for this match, because after that, it just felt like this Camelot was unstoppable.
It did. Layers set the tone early on and then continued that trend moving forward, makes his way over to the right-hand side of the map, picks up another kill a little bit later on. And this is not a conventional pick, is it, out of the jungle for Layers, this Camelot more specifically. We've seen some variety out of jungle picks, but apparently Layers is a guy that has kept all things maybe on the table here, and Camelot certainly works.
Well, one thing that definitely makes Camelot a heck of a lot easier to play is just taking note of the front line that was banned leading into this match. The Scarabs pretty much said, Genetics, we're going to make you flex, and not only that, but Cerberus just doesn't have the same sort of interrupt potential against the Camelot as what some of those other frontline members, like the Ares, like the Fafnir, Terra, Amir, all of it just completely stripped away here. And I did have some concerns about Scarabs not prioritizing SOT's pick in that initial top 3, but it worked out perfectly fine.
It sure did. And now, Game 3, it all simplifies here. One more game, the Scarabs win, they move on. The Kings win, they move on. That's all you have to look at here. after game number 2. It's so interesting as well. If you're the Scarabs now, and I love kind of analyzing previous drafts, are you okay? Or let me rephrase this. If you're the Kings, do you change anything up, assuming that Genetics is going to get 5-stack banned in the Scarabs draft phase here?
Well, you have to assume that with the Scarabs finding success, going for 5 target bans against their support, it's never fun to be the member that's actually isolated in that regard. But this is where that ebb and flow adaptation has to begin taking place. And Camelot Kings, and I think Genetics specifically, might be looking to try and prioritize his pick in that initial top 3. They've been leaning pretty heavily into getting a nice strong laning phase option for variety.
Yep.
Maybe some switch ups need to take place there, because it's not like the Scarabs are heavily prioritizing what SOT is trying to work with. So it might even benefit the Kings to just reserve that solo lane pick until a little bit later on in the draft. That way we can see a more favorable matchup there for Genetics, and not necessarily having to fall all the way back onto a Cerberus, because Cerberus, I think, at one point definitely had his heyday, but I think the problem with Cerberus into what the Scarabs are trying to do is that Inbound has made it very clear. He just wants to play dummy pressure into the Camelot Kings. And I just don't really feel as though Cerberus is the kind of support that really prioritizes peel as much as he does just initiation.
And I think that's an important point there. You have to give some props to Inbound here as well, because in a draft phase where your team is going to take 5 supports off the board, the Kings ban out a couple supports as well there in game 2. Inbound showing the flexibility to play something we don't often see, if ever, in the Circuit support. 369, it was okay there on the Circuit support, but Inbound showing that if the game plan for the Scarabs needs to be take all of these picks away from Genetics, then Inbound is going to be able to slot on into that one. And I see no changes over the horizon here for the Solar Scarabs. Ymir, Terra, Fafnir taken away. Sobek and Hercules there as well. The Tiamat was let through there, and I don't think the Tiamat was... I mean, there were actually some really nice setup plays from Baronic, but it's interesting to see how the Kings will adapt and change their third and final ban if they do, and they will not. So now the Tiamat is left open again if the Solar Scarabs still see that pick as the most prioritized left available.
Most notably, Baronic able to find that 3-man stun near that T2 side of the map during that initial sieging point. And I think that the Tiamat is just, if it's not broke, don't fix it, Dave.
Sure.
And I love the fact that Baronic, I think, seemingly showing some of that confidence that we've personally been able to witness him have in the past, but now trying to transition some of that console experience into the actual pro league. And Tiamat is certainly a guy that he was able to not only have decent survivability on, but he also had really good control when the Scarabs were, like, they did 50-50 the Fire Giant a decent bit. And the fact is, the Kings just could not break through that Tiamat. And Inbound also, I think, making a wise choice, kind of sacrificing himself for the greater good.
Yeah, and so I think that's where you see some of the confidence here for the Scarabs, going back to that Tiamat pick where Baronic 0, 2, and 11, more of a facilitator role there. Still did some good damage numbers, not so much in the killing department, but the damage was there. Now, this is interesting here. First off, Gilgamesh Kukulkan. That's a pretty solid frontline stack, if you ask me, there for the Camelot Kings. But then the Solar Scarabs go back to this Heimdall. Did you like what you saw enough from the back line of the Scarabs in Game 2? Obviously, it won, so there's some merit to it. But did you like the Tiamat Heimdall stack enough that you're not surprised to see the Scarabs go back to it?
The switch up to consider is that Heimdall naturally hits harder than some of the other hunters available. So when it came to that Fire Giant dance, Zatman was able to maintain aggro, I think, slightly longer than some other hunters, as well as still being able to chip away at that objective health, which is definitely important. Plus, that ultimate from Heimdall is great for disengage, and I think that with Gilgamesh and Kukulkan locked in, Heim can certainly look for self-peel. It's the Ares prioritization. This is the switch-up that I was kind of expecting to happen now for the Kings, because you can ban 3 supports, but you can't ban them all.
Yeah, the Solar Scarab sure would have tried, I think, had Genetics not gotten his pick. So, to further recap, if you're just joining us in Game 2, the Solar Scarabs banned out all 5 supports with their bans and left Genetics a little bit further down with the Cerberus later on. So the Kings remedy that by grabbing the Ares, one of the Game 2 bans. of the Solar Scarabs. So the Kings giving Genetics the opportunity to perform. Now we'll sweep into the second wave of bans here. Fafnir has been important, but Fenrir is the one that ends up getting banned out here, Taco. So that's the first maybe big pivot we've seen, where we've had Fenrir so far in this set. He's come around, he's had some impact, but now going to find his way into the ban column.
I don't think Kings are going to feel as threatened by inbound on the Circuit support. I would probably be a little bit surprised. If they ban it, it's simply because they just want to force Bobby onto a different pick. But into this current three-man lineup that the Kings are running, Circuit would certainly encounter some pretty big difficulties. And I do like the adaptation to just ban out the Yemoja, but what I'm also trying to keep in mind, I wouldn't hate to see a Nemesis pick here for layers.
Oh, why is that? Why does Nemesis jump out to you right now?
You see a lot of tanks, and what's Nemesis best known for? Being the tank destroyer, and it might even alleviate some of that mandatory relic slot pressure to try and pick up a Sunder, because as it's currently standing, at least in game one, I didn't see inbound lean into that Sunder. He actually opted for the Thorns and Horrific Emblem on the Fenrir, and so I think that with the Nemesis, it would just be a strong asset at punishing the Ares anytime he looks for a solid no escape. But also have to keep in mind that Ratatosker is a decent option just because he can cut the gap pretty quickly and apply some pressure onto Netthroid and Big Man Tanks.
Nemesis still an option for the Solar Scarabs if that's the direction they want to go. Camelot Kings still trying to ban out inbound with their last two. Fenrir, as we talked about, followed up by the Yemoja ban. And then on the other side, Solar Scarabs directly targeting out Big Man Tings. This Ra combo has been very important for this Camelot Kings team throughout the year so far, with big setup from Captain Twig and then follow-up from BMT on the Ra. And then the Merlin as well, I think an important takeaway there from the Solar Scarabs. So two different mindsets, obviously both teams needing two for both, but maybe the most important utility remaining for the Scarabs is their support. And then mid lane over there for the Camelot Kings. And then Medusa one more time. Medusa versus Heimdall in lane should be fun to watch.
Should definitely be an interesting matchup, and one that Zapman is certain to be familiar with. Same can be said, though, for Netthroid. I also just really like the team effort that is very obvious with this Kings composition. They have really good AoE control right now between that frontline setup and the Tsukiyumi, however. That is definitely a little bit of a comfort pick coming out from Layers, but it's also one that he has definitely talked about liking because of the fact that Tsukiyumi is able to provide decent range, and there is a lot of up close and personal team fight involved with this Kings draft so far.
And 1 out of his last 6 games has been the Tsukiyomi. 6, 8, and a loss to the Onya Warriors was the last time we saw Layers play this. But you're absolutely right, it's a pick that Layers has played and has performed on outside of the last 6 games so far here in Season 8. And then the Kuzenbo. As I'm looking in the camera, I kind of see you like nodding your head over there at that pick. And so it'll be a Kuzenbo for inbound in a do-or-die Game 3. Do you agree with the pick here?
I don't hate it, but my concern, Kuzenbo has kind of fallen out of grace in the competitive meta, largely just because of the fact that he doesn't really feel as though he has great survivability. Even you would imagine that with this kit basically punishing you for landing your abilities, for landing your auto attacks. My main idea here that I think the Solar Scarabs are trying to accomplish is just the same thing that they've been trying to do for the past 2 games. Kill Netthroid. Netthroid, I think, is the target, and as long as the Solar Scarabs are able to take him out quickly, then that could pose a lot of issues for the Kings as this game develops into that mid-game portion. Yeah,
there's plenty of disruption there with the Kuzenbo as well, so I'm intrigued as to how this starts to look for the Solar Scarabs as the game goes on. The Camelot Kings will finalize their draft. Look, you had the Merlin and the Ra band out, so Big Man Tings was going to have to go to something a little bit different then. And the Agni is the answer. Now, this Agni pick has seen an increase in play here as of late, Taco. Do you think it meshes well with the other 4 that the Kings have drafted?
Can't say that I'm surprised to see the Agni coming out when we saw Dardes on it yesterday. And that's just something that I feel Dardes and Tings have always had similarities towards, is whenever one's playing, you can expect the other to be leaning towards also. I almost feel like that's probably something they pick up from each other even. And offset moments, maybe looking towards that scrim environment a little bit heavier, but Agni kind of just lines up with the rest of the theme here for the Kings. It's just all about the AoE objective control.
And I so much of this in my mind leans on this Ares and the ability to get some of those beads burnt off of the source. I mean, obviously that's the name of the game with Ares. If there are beads up when your ultimate is there and they're immediately going golden and getting themselves out of that CC, do you think there's enough alternate lockdown with this Kings draft to give Genetics on this Ares the ability to find some engagements as the game goes on.
Potentially, but this is really feeling like either or at this point.
Just a toss of the coin maybe going
Whoever
in.
executes better. I like both of these compositions. I think that it plays into both of these teams' strengths, and it's really just going to come down to who gets the better engage.
And look, I think I like that, right? You're going into a game 3. It's do or die, winner take all. If you win, you go to the playoffs. If you lose, you're out of the playoffs. You don't want to go into game with one team immediately feeling like they're outdrafted, right? It felt like both teams have given themselves a chance to execute, given themselves a chance to win one final time. Game number 3, Solar Scarabs, playoffs on the line. Aggro and Gormizer will take us in.
Thanks, Dave and Gore. That's right. It's sudden death, do or die here for these two teams. And will the Bugs get squashed or will the Kings be dethroned? I came up with that idea by myself to say that here in Game 3 cast. Thank you, Gormizer, for clapping it up. As we're in for a good one, man. The early games have been a little bit slower to start so far, but, man, they have delivered in the mid to late game fights.
I have 2 thoughts coming into this. Just based on those claps, 1, we might need a soundboard. But 2,
True.
is that there is a lot of weight on this one. Because the way things have unfolded in this set, it does mean no matter what, whichever team wins this, their 3rd seed, giving the Warriors number 1, Kings number 2. But it also does still mean that this is the most important game up to this point that these teams have played this year. And it's going to be coming down to this. Yesterday, I saw this Agni locked in specifically for Dardes. I had said, man, I thought of Wolfie when I think of it because he's the one. He's been playing a lot in the SCC this year, but felt like he played it quite a few times. I was actually wrong. Big Man Tings played it the most last year. So it's going to be interesting to see what he's able to do with it, considering we've seen him find some success. It's something, I mean, this is just going to be such an interesting matchup. Twig as well back onto this Gilgamesh. That doesn't feel very kill-heavy to me as a duo. But you never really know what to expect with these two, especially with the build Twig went earlier.
That Druid's in trouble. Remember, that dash can get blocked pretty easily, and he is being awfully patient with it. Finally, he will dash away, but it cost him most of his HP bar. Genetics gave a little bit of damage back on the other end, but certainly inbounds blink in, worth his while, gets plenty of damage onto Netrioid and potentially giving lane pressure over towards that man early on in this lane.
That's something that they were talking about on the desk and a little worried about. Kuzenbo is going to be so good at displacing this Medusa. Like you said, so easy to block her dash. As long as you get the grip on her early and you get the sumo slam and you push her away, from that point forward, it's just exactly what we just saw. Make it feel really awkward for Netrioid to try and find the angle out. And granted, you're not going to be able to block everything that goes your way, but it's going to give a lot of aggression to the side of the duo lane. Something they didn't really have in game number 2 or game number 1, really, despite having some picks that maybe would have warranted it. And so if they can control this, that's such a heavy start for them, especially how much they've been focused on trying to slow down Genetics and Netrioid as a duo.
Netrioid, I think, for my money, Gore, has had a little bit of a quiet set so far, and I think that I'm not saying that he's played this set poorly. It's that I think he's played so well the rest of the year that having him not just pop off very obviously in our faces is a little bit of a change of pace.
I mean, that's something that this entire dueling, like we even talked about. I think there was a point, I don't know if it's gone live or not, but I'm absolutely going to talk about it. I talked to, I think it was Twig, it might have been a post-game interview, where he was like, yeah, we're kind of surprised Netrioid and Genetics get on so well. Like this duo lane just kind of came together and does everything the way that they need to. Get along just enough that they're going to be able to make this look good. And like you said, it's really paid off. Genetics looks great on multiple supports. We saw him completely banned out by the Scarabs last game, and even still, he was able to look good on another pick. This time around, it's going to be something that maybe is a little more of a facilitator for him alongside this Medusa. I'm excited to see what they can do in hands. This Ares was banned out in that second phase in game 2.
Yeah.
So it's something he's been going to, something he's been successful with. And if you can get Netrioid back into that shining light like you had mentioned, I think it's going to be a lot more devastating of a blow than the Scarabs might be ready for.
Duo lane certainly was a big difference maker in game number 1 of this set. Apologies for the quick pause. Should be getting back in game shortly, or have some more information for you shortly, one or the other. Is Gore, when you're talking about biggest games this year, remember that this is the biggest game of some of these guys' SPL career.
True.
Veronic,
Yeah.
Layers, these guys have not been around that much. This is their very first phase, so we'll see if they're able to keep those nerves under control here in this game.
And that's kind of the mounting pressure, right? Like, it's not, like the second set today where you're playing for seeding, like, yeah, you'd really like to be your first seed, you'd really like to be in control and dominate. This is we just might not make the playoffs for some players. I'm sorry, Ducky, I'm going to throw you under the bus. You haven't gotten to go to a playoffs in a hot minute. You haven't been able to get there. Inbound Zapman able to get a world championship under his belt, but some of these players inbound on that team last year that just wasn't able to quite get to any of those playoffs and showcase what they have in those settings. So maybe even more hunger, not just because it's the most important SPL game for them, but because they've been here and there's for some of them in these shoes before and not quite been able to crack that shell open. And so I want to see what they can do, but I think, I'd mentioned this earlier. Granted, game number 2 was not as methodical quite as I thought it had been when I had said in game 1 everything is going to pop off and then game 2 is going to be slower. This one should, though. It feels like they're both approaching this in a much more do-or-die fashion.
Oftentimes in these final game scenarios, both teams really hit the brakes hard because they realize what's at stake, that no more mistakes can be made and then be able to make it to the event. Worth noting that despite the fact that Baronic and Layers in particular, SPL rookies, Inbound as you mentioned, has not played in an SPL playoff event. These guys are world champions on the console side. They've played in big games in their careers before and have been able to have some very big performances. So certainly not untested in that realm, just maybe at this level. So I want to focus a little bit on this Agni pick, Gore. You mentioned that Big Man liked it quite a bit last year. We saw it for the very first time in Season 8 yesterday for Dardes. How do you think that Agni fares up against what the Solar Scarabs are going to be throwing at him?
Now, the thing is it always depends on the style of Agni, right? Like, he's a weird god that can potentially carry. He always has, like, a sneaky amount of damage that I never tend to expect. I don't know how many times I'll have to see him do it before my brain recorrects that, but there's a lot of, not sustained, setup that's going to help in a lot of moments like that.
Layers, his beads are down, his ult is not just able to have that. That must have been the last frame of CC immunity there. Very close to springing the trap and getting Layers down. And that is going to be a key for the Kings in this game. Layers, a huge reason why the Scarabs were able to claw back into game 2. And now on the pick that I think most who might associate him with in the SPL this season is Tsukiyomi.
And this is, like you said, a crucial game for him, the way he played in game 2. And, like, it's a bit of a moment, right, where the Kings overextend, they play a fight poorly, and yes, you can give it all credit to that, but because Layers got all those kills and had that performance, he was able to turn around the entire game. So one small slip-up from the Kings was all it took for him, and now he's on a pick that objectively he's played better and more, so it's going to be something I think that is going to be stressful for the Kings. I think a lot of pressure on him. Same thing for Tings there. Again, this one's a little harder to block, but those dashes are going to get forced really often by Inbound.
And no one was local for the Solar Scarabs, just that Inbound was dealing enough damage on his own to force those beads from Big Man Ting. So a good blink in from both supports. Gets relics from each team. We'll see which one is able to capitalize a little bit better. As this Gilgamesh pickup for Captain Twig, in my mind, Gore, did not look... It was not the best Gilgamesh jungle I've seen in game 1 of this set for Captain Twig. But he gets the win, he's able to get the job done, and then in game 2, Gilgamesh, played by Solar Troll, ends up winning as well. So 2-0 for the newest character available in competitive play so far in this set.
Genetics is the one I have my eyes on right now. I want to see more. Just Ares. I just want to see more Ares, maybe? I don't know. Jake's played him really well. He's gone like 8-2 on him, but I think this is one where it is the supports. Like, the junglers are really important. Twig and Layers, I think, had an important part of last game and whether or not their team found success. I think yes for Layers, no for Twig, based on that one fight. The supports right now, especially with how many support bans there have been, how much control there is focused on these two, I think Inbound could really make his tide splashes right here. It's because of this.
Captain Twig's able to secure both mids and then has to jump away. Good stun coming from BMT to make sure that Inbound can't keep that CC chain going too much. Despite the good engage from Genetics and Twig, it wasn't enough to get a kill onto Layers. He now has both his beads and his ult back up and available. course, the big cooldown that Bobby's going to have to worry about is that Watery Grave, because he has not gone with the Purification Beads, which I like quite a bit. Going with the Blink on the Kuzenbo feels pretty much required in my mind. Got to go Blink. Question is, will he go Thorns? As that was always the classic pairing with this god. Having Shell Spikes and Thorns gives you a lot of time where they can't hit you without taking a lot of damage. But I wonder if Sunder is just outclassing Thorns right now, even for someone like Kuzenbo.
That's that fun, like, math that you then have to do, right? Where you're like, well, they don't necessarily have any, like, burst mages, so it's not going to be as big of a damage return. It's like, but they do have a lot of damage over time and, like, abilities that they're going to fire in rapid succession. I'm looking at you, Agni. Like, a lot that having more Thorns means that that's less time BMT could theoretically get DPS or control out. So I think it's a win-win. I think no matter what relic he goes, he's going to be able to be happy with it. It's just which one beats out the other at level 12 that's going to be the most important. That Sunder, my brain froze on the word Sunder, has been the one that is a little more devastating to me, because when you just, the upgrade, 20% more damage increase. Look, there's a lot of fun ones. I love the 50% auto reduction that you have on Shell now. Granted, block stacks, yes, better, but 50% auto reduction still feels pretty nice. You get, what is it, the attack slow, I want to say, on Horrific, as well as some damage reduction that comes through. Like, there's just so many fun upgrades out there, especially for support uses. Frenzy is one of my favorite ones to go, especially when you're winning a game at an accelerated rate. I just think it opens up a lot of opportunities, especially now that Shell is a no longer go-to. Yes, Blink has kind of maybe shuffled its way in there for some of these supports, but there's a lot of fun little avenues to maybe play with here for either the Kings or the Scarabs. Granted, I don't think they're going to play with it. This is an important game. This is not the time to be trying out something new for funsies. They might figure it out.
Stun does not quite land onto Genetics. That might have been the start of something, but with Twig on the way in, I think that the support would have ended up being just a little bit too safe as we've eclipsed the 10-minute mark. Still killless here in game number 3. Remember, this one is worth a lot. Twig's going to come in, drop kick, bounce Bobby off the wall, but Bobby's got that push. In goes Layers with that piercing Moonlight, maybe a little bit too deep. Double stun, and Tings is going to claim first blood, but Genetics might be soon to follow. Tings has found his second. It's a double kill for the mid laner for the Camelot Kings, but Baronic has put the Solar Scarabs on the board.
You get that first blood on the jungler. Yeah, your supports trade out 1 for 1, but ultimately a little better for the Kings. And slowly but surely, they've got themselves a 2,000 gold lead. I don't know where that one came from. They only get about about 400 over what the Scarabs are able to pick up in that team fight. So it has just been generic farm the way they're playing the map throughout the last few minutes. It's given them such a rise. Yeah. And that is where dangers are going to be. You saw, like, inbound Layers is pretty easy to control. We've seen twice now where his beads, his ult even being forced by the Kings just to try and get some CC immunity and stay alive, but not able to get out that time around. Inbound, as much as you can, that nice long channeled ultimate of CC immunity ends eventually, and he gets pulled in there. Heimdall as well, only a small window of CC immunity. There's a lot of wiggle room, I think, for the Kings to really tackle the Scarabs and force beads, even in scenarios where otherwise they might be safe.
And with that, the Kings take hold of this game. Again, they were able to get a fairly significant lead, I would say, in game number 2, but the Scarabs battled back. So this is maybe where the Scarabs are at their most comfortable. They've been in this position a lot so far this year and have found way after way back into these games. Now they've got to try and do it again, though this time certainly not dramatic in terms of the comeback necessary. Double stun onto inbound, and he'll eat about half his HP, but that's all he'll have to take. Love the nature of this composition for the Kings. It's not a lot of commitment in order to get a pretty nasty CC chain.
Yeah, that's the thing that Agni, I think, really, really helps facilitate. Something that's easy to forget about, but you just, Noxus Fumes, either a Flame Wave, a dash if you really are crazy, or your ultimate, drop one of your meteors. You know they're going to be back soon enough. And it's a free stun from range, with Ares being able to find some good cripples. Something I've really liked the rise of is him against this Giannis, but up against Tiamat, stops her jump. Up against Kuzenbo, stops the dash. Will stop Zap from going through his Bifrost there, stops Layers from being able to get away. Like, a lot of the disengage that the Scarabs would otherwise be safe of, this Ares is going to stop. And then everybody else has just enough CC to lock him down, and like you said, without having to commit too much to it. I mean, Genetics is maybe the one who has to run in the most, and even then, Chains has a pretty decent range on it.
With that, the Kings grab up the Pyromancer. So another small win goes in their favor. That lead that was about 2K, now a little bit closer to 3K. The Scarabs still biding their time, waiting for layers for him to get towards that late game build. Netriod gonna go in on the 1v3 and ejects layers from the fight instantly, but now Netriod a little bit too low. Zapman's axe finds a home, and through the realms goes Genetics, but Twig has arrived. Zapman gonna exit stage left, courtesy of the Bifrost, but Solar Troll is on the way. He's here early as Genetics trying to follow this escape route down the left-hand side. SOT doesn't have Blink, and Genetics going to live. Netrioid not showing an ounce of fear in that snake body, went in 1v3 and got the kill.
And you know what? He got the red buff. He
And
did
the buff.
everything that he set forward with. In a 1v3, I don't think you walk into it expecting you're going to walk away with your life. The fact that he got the buff and the kill, absolutely worthwhile for him. But doubly important, having Zap have a kill on his belt now, really, really good. And I would argue Zap just had one of the best ults in this. If Genetics stays in that engagement with the way the Kings are starting to collapse, he just ults and pulls everybody in, forces some beads, otherwise really causes some trouble for the Scarabs in that event. Potentially gets more kills for the Kings. So I like the fact that he at least controls the front line. It's part of why Heimdall has been able to bring so much to the table lately. But it is only a little bit. Again, back in their favor. Just about 2,500 golds, now a little less than that in favor of the Kings. And that's the mark that they're going to try and chip away at. It was about 3,000. Cool, you brought it down to 2,300. Now bring it down a little further. Bring it down to 2K. Just knock it down slowly, or if you can get yourselves in a position for a Gold Fury, knock it down the big way. They have to start winning these fights a little more consistently, and just a red buff invade isn't enough for me to mount a lot of my money on.
Well, even though the gold difference is about 2,300, the experience is very close, pretty much locked between these two sides. But doesn't quite reflect in the levels. Layers and Baronic very slightly behind in those departments, enough where a wave made the difference in order to catch them up. But that does make at least a small difference, especially for this Agni as he gets closer and closer towards level 20. Tings took that double kill early and has not relinquished the lead. Level 16 now on the mid laner.
And he ticked up maybe 10 seconds after Baronic hit 15, so he's got pretty much the full level there, which is a little different when you look at the jungle and the solo laners, and it's been able to cost so much. Plus, he is out farming everybody. Where is Baronic on that one? Oh my god, had to drop down, what, 1,300 gold to find him on the chart? That is a lot of money. But again, that makes me think of was that game 1 or game 2? He had a very, very similar lead there for Tings.
Yeah, both games he was ahead, but obviously only able to convert on one of those. I do think that Agni a little bit better at pushing that lead than something like the Nuwa. I mean, you look at the performance that he had on the Merlin, quadra kills them, nearly pentakill the Solar Scarabs. Definitely did not have that same type of impact on the Nuwa. Getting in there and getting his hands dirty has always been something that Tings has been pretty good at. And I think Agni facilitates that a little bit more. Variety undeterred by the Ox. In fact, he's going to use it to build the Rage. Baronic knocked up and Thorns popped from Variety. It's a sentence I haven't said a whole lot this year. Thorns pick up for the solo laner this time around for the Camelot Kings. And it's enough to buy him space, but certainly not enough to guarantee this Gold Fury. Kings instead gonna head towards the mid-tier 1.
And in case you were wondering how outlandish it was, you said Thorns pop for Variety, and my eyes went to inbound Relics to make sure he had gotten Thorns there. No, it's going to be over there on that Cucullin. And granted, not a bad pickup for him, not something that we've seen a lot, like you said, this year, and really kind of waned off towards the end of last year as well. It was a very big solo lane pickup. It's going to be the beads blink on one side, no survivability in terms of that CC immunity, at least in terms of a relic for Variety. And maybe it's because, looking at it, he has less to worry about in terms of the CC department. I mean, there's some lockdown on the side of the Scarabs, but nothing that I'm screaming, I need beads here as a solo laner. I mean, your worst case scenario is Zap ults you, then you're just crying while you fly through the realms until you land back down. But even still, you land down as a solo laner, theoretically right near where you were launched off, somewhere in the vicinity at least. And that's going to be a good spot for him. So I think feeling safe, feeling confident, and being able to get aggressive will be big. The best thing for the Scarabs, though, in that entire engagement is just going to be the fact that they didn't let the Kings get the Fury. Now they might even start looking at it themselves.
Sentry Ward is down, and the Scarabs are the first ones on it. But Genetics, Netrioid, Twig, all local. Tang's going to dash forward, unsure of how willing the Scarabs were to commit. But it turns out this was just a phase for the Scarabs. They're going to back up and leave this Gold Fury behind. And I like the idea from the Scarabs, but I think they make the right call there, Gormizer. They've got to put some respect on the net worth lead that the Kings have, particularly in the back line. About 400 gold for Netrioid over Zapman, and of course that lead for Big Man Ting still about 1,300.
And he's already got that tier 2 artifact online, probably going into Charon's coin like he did last time around, but like that was where he was on Nuwa as well. I remember noting exactly that he had that entire item lead. Same thing that Netroid's got over Zap, despite Zap having the level lead, so that means he's probably got a back here soon. I can't imagine he's too far off of that pick.
Immediately towards the Gold Fury, but Scarabs have some info on it. I don't know if they're going to get close enough to make it matter, though. The Kings will walk away with the Gold Fury. And this feels a lot like Game 2 to me, Gormizer.
Yeah.
Slow pace through the early to mid-game, methodical in the approach. And the Kings being objective focused, but remember what lost them in Game 2. It was overextending after a couple of objectives. Gold Fury was one of them. They didn't do it this time around. And they'll walk on over, get the Pyromancer, and accept that win for what it is, not pushing further into the Scarabs jungle.
And they lost not only that overextension, but I think the Fire Giants afterward and EFG that went to favor the Scarabs. Even though they lost their front lines, that was all it really took for them to get the final nail in the coffin for the Kings in Game 2. This is going to be, like you said, a lot more restricted for them. How well can you engage? I think Agni is going to fit into the team better than Nuwa, as much as I like to see Nuwa. I just don't know what she was trying to accomplish in Game 2. I mean, there was a lot of opportunities for her, but none of the things that we expect from a Nuwa really happening. And we got to see, I think, Genetics kind of overcommit to a couple of fights and really lead the way. Twig as well, not quite sure where he wanted to commit. This has been a lot more steady from the Kings in terms of decision-making. The Ares feels like it's something that can relatively easily jump in, survive, and still get out in the event things don't go right for him. Has the upgraded Sunder now as well, so just on his own, I think that Genetics is going to be able to find a kill onto a Squishy. But in the middle of a team fight, he's going to be able to be immeasurable in terms of his output.
Well, he's got the Relic Dagger as well, so that Sunder will be used often, as well as, probably more importantly, the Blink. As we check in with what Inbound got, it is Thorns for this Kuzenbo. He's gone straight into the Pridwin, a build that feels very good on this god, just enables that dive a little bit more. Scarabs know that there are this many people here for the Kings. Zapman has that increased vision duration after they walk over a ward, and tossed up the one and saw everyone around and saw him pinging him out. So no surprise to me, the Scarabs want to play it nice and slow. Taking a look at the player damage charts, Gore, I mean, layers on the Tsukiyomi's been a talking point for him. It's been one of his most impressive gods so far this year. Has not really been that way quite yet, but if memory serves, this is usually the way Layers likes to play the Tsukiyomi. Slow through the early to mid game, and then tries to ramp it up in the late.
Well, this Greater Scorpion, I want to look at this set in particular and see how many enhanced buffs the Scarabs have had. Because I would bet it's close to 0. It feels like almost every time those Scorpions are available, the Kings, doesn't matter what side of the map they're on, they will go for it and get aggressive onto it. And again, I think those things are relatively low, quote-unquote, in terms of priority. Like, the impact they have is good. It's not going to be game-changing for you, which is exactly what you want. If you're something like the Kings, you don't want the Scarabs having just a free way back into it, but it's also good for the Scarabs. But I want to see if the Scarabs are going to be able to maintain control. I mean, that's something that is not quite in your jungle, but still losing it as often as they have has definitely started to give some question as to how much control the Kings have over it. And if they don't overextend, you're going to have to fight mano-a-mano the same way that you have been all up to this point if you're the Scarabs. And it's been going back and forth enough. Layers is the one that eyes have to fall onto. The Tsukiyomi, we talked it up a lot in the early game. Hasn't done too much since then. A couple of deaths, a couple of assists, but nothing too crazy out of him yet. I want to see what he can do in the middle of the fray, especially with that piercing Moonlight. Should be able to get pretty easily back to Netrioid or Tings and cause real trouble for the carries.
Certainly been his MO so far in this pick this year, but still a ways off level 20, level 18 for him, as a lot of other members are hitting level 20. Gem of Focus done for Big Man Tings. Netrioid elects not to upgrade his starter quite yet and goes with the Rage instead. Usually when you see Rage in that slot, it means that Bluestone is not getting upgraded, but instead sold for something like a Wind Demon or a Deathbringer, so something to keep an eye on. As Twig is going to leap in, think about starting the Fire Giant, and then back it up. Veronic level 20 as well, but hasn't upgraded his starter. Stun is there. Solar Troll doesn't quite find the ultimate on the Netrioid, but Twig has been poked. About a third of his HP bar now missing after that little engage coming from the Scarabs.
Pretty much nothing returned back to the Scarabs as a whole. I mean, they walk away almost unscathed. Inbound had slightly, like 200, maybe 300 health taken off. Same thing for SOT. They're going to be able to get that back. No rub and labor for them. So I'm really excited for where the Scarabs are going, especially after that small engagement. It just showcases that they are still firing on all cylinders. And this is one of those games, like, you look up, it's 5,000 gold in favor of the Kings. That is going to come into impact. You can watch the items. That's where it's going to be the biggest difference. A Rage versus what's looking like a chin size there for Zapman potentially coming through.
Yep.
And, you know, yeah, you're going to have the crit online for Netroid, but it's finishing it that makes the difference.
Well, it's Sunder for ult. Well, Sunder and ult, I suppose, for Genetics. That forces Zapman back. But here go the Kings on the Primal Fury, down to about 5%. But Layers knows this is going on because of the Oracles. Still, knowledge is not enough power in this instance in order for him to stop it. Primal Fury done by the Camelot Kings, and with the pace of this game, Gore, Primal Fury seems like maybe the best Fury they could have gotten.
It's one of, like, normally, I think I've been growing on it. I think I used to look down. I thought Oni Fury was just so immeasurably good, and it is still really nice, but Primal, especially at this sort of game, is the one that makes the big difference. You don't have the same amount of burn that you had in game number 1. Game number 2, you didn't have that same burn. Primal Fury was going towards the Scarabs. That really helped them out in a lot of those engagements. Now you have Tiamat minions that are in your favor if you're the Scarabs, but that Primal Fury should be able to help out with some Fire Giants, Pyromancer, something on this side of the map, and try to further your lead even more. Again, that goes into the items, but it hasn't really translated into much else. This will be a big fight.
Chain is good on the inbound. Solar Troll is now the target for Genetics. He loses about a fifth of his HP bars. The Tiamat minions continue to push on the left. Finally, the Scarabs have started to group up, and they're doing so down about 6,000 gold. Now as Variety get a blink in, gets the fight started. Zapman is the focus. The winds of Shamash going to cause him some problems, but he's got the Bifrost. Inbound wishes. He was quite as lucky. His Layers has found his way back into the back line. Netrioid is the focus for him, but he's going to get yoinked on back. Did get the kill before he ended up getting pulled back, but it's a double kill for Big Man Tings, and Variety looks nigh unstoppable here on the backline dive. The Kings lost their ADC, but took inbound and Layers for the trouble.
Pyromancer goes down, but without Netrioid, this is what I said earlier, you don't really want to get a Fire Giant. Now Variety's in trouble.
That's why I said nigh unstoppable, not truly unstoppable. Baronic is going to be able to take him down, and now Twig into the fray. Big Man Tings low in the HP department, but so are the Solar Scarabs, but not low enough to back up. This team will not relinquish their footing. It's a triple kill for Baronic, 4-0 on the Tiamat. And all of a sudden, the Kings have lost all their jesters. It's just Big Man Ting standing on their side of the map.
Avrin, Rach, I know you're watching this. We need the handshake meme. It's Kings and overextending. There is no better duo so far this set. It's essentially winning the Scarabs their games right now. And that was a fight. I mean, so clean. If Variety doesn't continue chasing that, if the rest of the team just stays back, they are solidly in control. Gold, still in their favor. What, 5K, maybe a little over? It doesn't mean a thing if it don't got that swing, but also if it doesn't have a Fire Giant, and that is what the Scarabs are looking at right now.
That man's counter-punching style continues to work, man. It got him 2 World Championships, the 2-time, and now it might be getting him a berth to the Phase 1 playoffs. They let the Kings tucker themselves out to the first few rounds, and now the Scarabs are starting to go for the knockout punch. Fire Giant secured by the Solar Scarabs. Gold lead be damned. They are the ones with the buff.
I mean, this is exactly what you want to see if you're a Scarabs fan. Exactly what you want to see if you're looking to go to the playoffs as the Scarabs. I mean, we were talking about how hard this week was going to be for them. It has not been. This was a difficult group. The Warriors decide to start showing up. All of a sudden, that causes trouble. In fact, the Warriors, the only ones that were able to 2-0 the Scarabs throughout all of this. Everybody else has been pushed to 3. Now the Kings, I think, finding out exactly why the Dragons have been struggling against them.
Look at what the Kings are doing. They're pushing down mid. It's Twig and Genetics on the push there, but Layer showing up is enough to force them back. No tier 2 secured. Baronic doesn't have a lot of minions in the side lanes. He's going to spawn another portal here on the right. So now he's got 2 portals worth of minions pushing on this right-hand side. But there's no towers remaining over here. A lot of gold stored on the map. But Gore, I will say this. Solar Scarabs got a Fire Giant earlier in this set. Did not really do enough with it until the Kings overextended.
Yeah.
You gotta imagine the Kings are gonna be cognizant of that and force the Scarabs to make the play themselves instead of waiting for the Kings to make it for them.
And that's where it gets a little weird and murky in the waters, right? You trying to read the future for this game, there's not a lot of guarantees. But with the Fire Giant still going 2.5 minutes on that one, you feel pretty good about your chances to knock down what should be a tier 1, potentially a tier 2 in mid. It gets to the Phoenix conversation, though, and that's where things start to fall apart for me. I think the Kings have a pretty solid Phoenix defense. I don't know about the Scarab Siege. It all depends really on Layers and SOT for me on that one. If they're able to get in there, they're going to be able to do a lot, and I actually like the fact that the Kings are stepping up here. I think this is exactly where they can fight. If they stay here, if they overextend, things will just absolutely crumble for them. But as long as they hover around these tier 2s, these Phoenixes, I think they have just as much strength to punch back at the Scarabs and really cause just a topsy-turvy set.
Man, shades of game 2, all right. Kings in control, overextend after a winning fight, lose a big objective off the back of it. It's Fire Giant in this instance. And now they sit awaiting the Fire Giant enhanced Scarabs underneath their tier 2 in mid. Remember, this is where the Scarabs backed up, didn't really do a whole lot off of it, and ultimately the Kings were able to defend for a little bit longer. Now, eventually the Scarabs win that game, but this has still been the trend. And Solar Patrol might be a little bit overextended here. Beads are expended, and he's going to have to use the ultimate. Netrioid's beads are down, but Solar Patrol is already gone. It's too little, too late for the solo laner. Now Inbound might have jumped into the Sark-infested waters, trying to save his solo laner, and that has sealed the warrant for this siege for the Solar Scarabs. Their front line eviscerated, and now the Camelot Kings are going to surge.
Little did we know that the Kings slipped a page of their own playbook right under SOT. Talking about overextensions. I mean, they do get the tier 2. That is a benefit for them, but it's 600 gold separating these two teams. Like, tier 2's the gold, like, we're getting to the point where almost all that matters is your capabilities of selling boots and buying something. I guess the supports still need to upgrade their starters, but you're looking more at the Phoenix implications. 2 exposed Phoenixes there for the Kings, but a lot of the control in the game. Still 10 seconds without anybody. Doesn't look like they're going to be able to get anything done here. 30 seconds before that Fire Giant wears off. Scarabs aren't going to be able to do anything. I mean, it's not been bad team fights from these teams. The teams are playing them very well when they are the ones that are able to collapse on the guys overextending. It's just that the other team keeps making these weird decisions. Like, one person just doesn't get the memo, or depending on the conversation, 3 people don't get the memo and they're not up there with everybody else. I think SOT was looking for a loop around, didn't quite expect the Kings to just be laying in wait in the jungle. They found that pick there, lucky enough to get Inbound on the back end of that. Inbound just trying to save his teammates. And now aggro, I mean, it feels like it comes right back to square one. We look towards that Fire Giant, enhanced this time around.
That's right.
And that's going to be the end-all be-all. 2 towers standing for the Scarabs, slightly takier Titan, only 1 Phoenix to go through if the Kings want to fight, versus 1 tower standing for the Kings and 2 Phoenixes exposed. There's a lot of topsy-turvy coin flips in there, but at the end of the day, I just keep looking down, looking at the wards that are in inventory. Those are going to be crucial, and at some point, somebody's going to be able to afford the speed potion just to sell off their boots and maybe get another big power spike.
Baronic has set some minions in left. I think he might have actually misplaced his second portal.
Oh, yeah, 'cause they're going
actually,
mid.
yeah, they came back towards the mid lane. That could end up mattering, though 2 portals really isn't enough anymore. You need 3 or 4 to start stacking up, and of course you need full CDR in order for that to happen. Baronic sitting at 30% unless he has that red pot, which would get him to the cap. As the Kings are the ones with the vision advantage around this enhanced Fire Giant. No pot for Baronic, so it is only 30% CDR for him. And with that, the waves are actually pushing in the Kings' favor on the left-hand side. Stun into chain. Inbound loses a small chunk, but not a whole lot. Layer's positioning in this fight is going to be critical, as he has that Bumba's Hammer done. Not a lot of characters still building Bumba's Hammer, but Tsukiyomi, really the main abuser of this item, still feels like a match made in heaven for the guy.
That's a massive wave on left, gunning for a tier 2 right now. Keep your eyes on that. It's probably just going to be, what, half a tier 2, maybe 3/4 of a tier 2 because it's a little bigger. That's going to be able to get that health bar down. Not enough, I don't think. I might be speaking too soon. It's going down a lot faster than I thought it was. Now they're going to engage.
Blink in from inbound. Tings has already used the beads and the dash, and inbound undeterred, still pushing forward. Shell Spikes and Thorns in tow, and Variety is trying to back it up. Twig now loses the beads as inbound has made his impact felt already in this team fight, and he still has the ultimate, but no relics available. Kick back from Captain Twig, and now inbound has no ultimate. You know Genetics is looking for him, but can he close the gap in time? Everyone trying to bail out inbound now as Tings dashes forward, double stun. Baronic does not get chained, and Genetics still has that blink, but can't quite get out of combat. Really close, but 2 sets of beads down on that right-hand side for the Camelot Kings matters quite a bit. They are not deterred, though. Inbound going back to base means they're going to be the ones starting the Fire Giant. Down to below half, falling lower, and Solar Patrol is in, looking to steal it away, and you know he does! King me, baby! I've got the EFG, and Genetics is falling too low. No one's going to be able to save his life, and the Camelot Kings walking away without a crown.
2 exposed Phoenixes, and now those backdoor protections mean nothing. The Scarabs are playing it exactly right here. Run it down. They've even got a minion wave. Those Tiamat minions accidentally going in mid kind of paid off. Maybe Verona can spin that one to be more intentional. Maybe it was intentional. You'll never know as it comes through. Now they get to aggress onto this Phoenix, really put some pressure on the Kings.
Still no beads or Aegis now for Tings. He's got to play back. Mid-Phoenix is already a foregone conclusion, as the Scarabs are looking to punch their ticket to the Phase 1 playoffs, but 4 members still stand for the Solar Scarabs. This will be a difficult end, and it might be too soon for the Scarabs to get their ticket punched. As inbound and the rest of the crew start to back up, but they have baited in Twig. Drop kick might have been a little bit too much as Baronic finds his 5th in a row. Genetics still 5 seconds off the respawn, and the Scarabs dipping their toe back in the pool of the Titan room until whoever is doing the shot calling yanks on the leash and pulls them back. Genetics now up, but the Scarabs might be able to keep on going.
Beads down for Baronic and SOT, so pretty simple targets for Genetics. Blink Sunder available for him again. We saw how badly he wanted it last time. Might go in, but they kept him in combat, and Phoenix is gone!
Gone in the blink of an eye. Now just 1 Phoenix remains. Nice double stun from Solar Troll. Finds Netrioid, who again has no relics, but no one else from the Solar Scarabs can close the gap. Now 2 Phoenixes down, left and mid side exposed, as the Scarabs begin to pull it back. Oni Fury's up, and when you're talking fire Oni waves with Tiamat minions, that's a game-ending proposition. And the Scarabs still have 2 minutes on EFG.
It's this weird moment. Do you back and buy? I think that's exactly what they're going to do. Oni Fury plus fire minions, like you said, plus Tiamat minions. You back, you buy, you get the power potions, what have you. Just a power pot purchase there for inbound. So he's going to be coming back with a little more punch behind him, as well as a lot of these upgrades. Elixir of Power, the full drop there, coming down for Layers and for Zapman. Hell, and for Baronic. You know what? Everybody get one at this point. I think this is going to be something that they're not expecting on the other side for the Kings. That's going to be a nice big power spike for the Scarabs. But it still comes down to that engage, and that's going to be the difficult part, even with the Phoenix exposed at this point.
Let's check out that replay of Solar Troll stealing away the EFG. This is what sets it up for the Solar Scarabs. An unbelievable steal, and that lack of secure comes back to bite the Camelot Kings. SOT merely throws the game on that left side by getting picked. I think he's made up for it now, stealing away that EFG. All sins forgiven.
Absolutely gives himself kind of carte blanche. You can do whatever you want. Rest of the game. Yep, you're fine.
You did it.
We absolutely agree with you. And there's only 1 Phoenix left for them. They still, like you said, only have, well, now a little less than a minute on this Fire Giant buff. That's enough time to knock down 1 more bird.
Inbound has gotten Tings' beads again. Variety into the back line, but he is ejected by Zapman. Through the realms he goes, but inbound still gonna keep getting it. He got the other set of carry beads as well. Are you kidding me? This Kuzubo is doing work, but now he is yanked back by Genetics. And
Layers.
Captain Twigs to be able to get him, but Layers has already found 2.
Found 3.
That's 3 actually down for the Solar Scarabs, as it's just the backliners remaining, and Baronic and Zapman have got to back it up, but the Kings cannot afford to chase. Maybe a blessing in disguise for the Camelot Kings that they get reined in by these fire minions, because chasing has been their bane so far this set. Enhanced fire waves on this left-hand side, but the Kings live to fight another day.
They've got to have flashbacks. They were the team that won with Winions over there against the Dragons, using that Tiamat extra push, the little help that came through. Now they've got 3 waves of fire minions. Look, Zapman knows more than anybody, I think, in the last couple of years how difficult this is to come back from, and I think the Kings are going to be feeling that through their entire core. But everybody, 20 seconds left on respawn. Variety died at the exact same time as all members of the Scarabs there. And so it is going to be pretty much on point for every single respawn. We might just be coming back, not necessarily to square one. Huge map advantage for the Scarabs. But that Fire Giant's really important.
But that map advantage is getting smaller here, Gormizer. Mid Phoenix has respawned. Left won't be too far behind. And the one Phoenix that will stay down for a much longer period of time is closest to the enhanced Fire Giant. Now, of course, you cannot disrespect these fire waves on the left, because you've got Tiamat minions alongside them. So those could end the game. Ask the Jade Dragons, they could tell you. So that's a wave that the Camelot Kings have got to respect. And of course, no teleports or global ultimates on their side in order to assist in defending this EFG. It's Twig's job to defend, and as soon as they see him on that left wave, immediately towards the EFG go the Solar Scarabs. Genetics on his way in, gonna put out some good damage on the inbound. Sunder is out, and so that Kuzenbo no longer quite as tanky, but Big Man Tings is in trouble. Here comes Layers directly into the back line. Good use of that Aegis, prevents too much damage from going through, but now he's in a bit of trouble. Genetics is the first one on the chopping block. Variety gonna fall as well. The 2-time with the 2 kills. Zapman 406 on this Heimdall. The Solar Scarabs backline continues to stay pristine. No kills onto the backline of the Solar Scarabs here in Game 3.
And this has been a quiet set from Zap to this moment. This is where he's starting to shine, exactly where they need to. The Scarabs looking much better, much more comfortable now. They've got that EFG around their belt one more time. Right, Phoenix is exposed.
I think they're trying
30
to end.
seconds? Yeah, I think you go for this.
They're not going for these Phoenixes quite yet. They start to shade towards the mid lane, but this won't take long for mid Phoenix to fall down. 25 plus on both frontliners. They've got a fire wave coming in left, but that's the last fire wave they have. They've got to make the call. The Titans already lost about a third of its HP. Solar Troll in first, but he's falling pretty quickly. In fact, SOT is on the way out, but not as quickly as the Camelot Kings. You gotta be kidding me. The rest of the SPL's on notice. The Solar Scarabs are in to the Phase 1 playoffs.
They're the well, I guess King Killers is the best way to describe it right now. They are taking down top teams in matchups that in the vacuum should not be going their way. In late game team fights that, at least in theory crafting, shouldn't be going their way. That Scarabs roster is something else right now. I am really happy to see their turnaround. Again, those first 3 weeks, it was very shaky as to what their foundation was going to be. Whatever they did to turn it around, whatever they've done to progress since then, has made them one of the scariest teams to go against. They haven't done it consistently yet, but they've done it enough to get to playoffs.
Man, everyone said about the Scarabs team, yeah, they'll be good eventually, but it'll take some time. You roll the lines from all the player interviews, from all the caster interviews. It's going to take this team too long to be able to step up and do their thing. They've already arrived, baby. They are in the Phase 1 playoffs, and the Camelot Kings, despite a phenomenal Phase 1 performance, they'll be at home watching. Unbelievable set here to kick us off on a Sunday. We'll be right back as we break down an incredible set.
apparently the Stranger Things crossover has dropped a little bit early here because we're in the upside down. The Solar Scarabs just knocked the Camelot Kings, technically not out of the Phase 1 playoffs, but the Camelot Kings will not be going to the Phase 1 playoffs, and the Solar Scarabs will. And I don't think that's giving this team enough credit, the little upside down joke. This Solar Scarabs team has consistently been improving over the last few weeks, and it all culminates here, Taco, with a win over the Camelot Kings.
And for what it's worth, the Camelot Kings have definitely had a very strong regular season showing so far, but
I can't believe
when it matters most, they end up getting
Wow.
smited quite literally by the Bug Boys.
They get bugged.
And they did get bugged. Quite. I mean, we've got the Jam. We got the Jam Boys,
We're getting
and
jammed,
now
we're getting
bugged.
That's right.
It just kind of flows, just like the Solar Scarabs. I think were flowing really well together in that last game. That was just a very precise, and that's the kind of execution that I was looking for and
Right.
hoping for. The Kuzumbo, it strayed a little bit away from some of that more physical-based target focus and aggression that we saw inbound trying to run, but overall, I think the mental was still the exact same here. Just get Bobby in there to harass, get SOT to help assist him with the space creation,
Stealing FG.
and that, King Arthur 1 just secures those.
Yeah, so in your mindset, is that that's got to be a fumble by the Kings,
That's a
right?
fumble in the bag.
That's not a fire giant that should be stolen away.
Not by a King Arthur 1. No, that's that is definitely something that I think Tings, as well as the rest of that Camelot King squad, probably going to be kicking themselves for in the review process of this game. But I know that we're putting a lot of highlight emphasis around inbound and SOT, and don't get me wrong, they've definitely deserved it with how they played this set. But can we just take a moment to talk about Baronic? Because
Baronic and
he
Zap,
just
they go
had
crazy.
an insane set for himself.
He has. Veronica has absolutely grown up into this league, it feels like, almost before our eyes. 5-0-5 in the final game here on this Tiamat. It felt like the Kings were rolling the dice a little bit in Game 2 when they gave the Tiamat over to Baronic. 0-2-11. Remember, it was a very support-esque slash line there in Game 2, but it was a win for the Solar Scarabs. Are you surprised that Baronic gets the Tiamat again here going into Game 3? Remember, there's so much support emphasis on the board, and then the Giannis got banned out from Baronic consistently throughout these games. It feels like you're rolling the dice a little bit every time you let this Tiamat go through.
Hindsight's always going to be
Of course.
20/20 when it comes to these things,
Of
and I
course.
think that for the Camelot Kings, they just had to make a split decision for this set of where they wanted to prioritize the picks bans, and I just don't think that they were expecting Baronic to have the level of success that he was able to find back-to-back with the Tiamat. I'm pretty sure that the Kings believe that Game 2 success on Tiamat was largely credited to the fact that the front line was just able to do a lot of space creation between layers, inbound, and solo retrol. So Zap and Baronic were definitely able to find a pretty flawless follow-up, but ultimately, I just think that the Tiamat had way too much pressure, way too much damage, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. 5-0-5 again is Baronic's KDA in this all-important Game 3. Baronic joins me now for the post-game interview, and what a guy to talk to right after a set like we had here. Baronic, first and foremost, congratulations. And talk to me a little bit about, we talked in the pre-game desk about Zapman and SOT and inbound even, and how yourself and Layers would need to lean and grow on those types of players that have had the experience at the SPL level, especially in a game like this. Look, your playoffs effectively started today. It was a do-or-die game against the Kings. Talk to me a little bit about how the team came together and maybe what that mindset was like going into such an important set.
I mean, I think us three as console kids, when it always came to lands or like very, very important games, we always seemed to like step it up and just turn it up to like a whole nother level. And then obviously Zap is like a long veteran, right? So he has that leadership behind us, and you know, if any of us four do slip up, then he kind of is there to, you know, remind us that, you know, that every game is winnable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. As a team, like I've always said it, like this whole phase, our potential is like out of this world.
Right.
So I mean, I'm just so glad we were able to show it today.
And I think we're really starting to see that potential over the last few weeks and the last few games specifically. You've taken now sets off some massive teams here. absolutely deserve your spot in the Phase 1 playoffs. And I mean this with all due respect. Given the way that Season 8 started for you guys, what does it mean now that you beat the Camelot Kings to go to the Phase 1 playoffs after what was a rocky start here to Season 8?
Honestly, I kind of feel for the Kings after you know, them having such a really good split too, and just fall short of playoffs like all of a sudden. But I don't know. We've beaten and taken like plenty of games off of top teams. So I mean, this one feels special obviously because it was playoff clinching. But yeah, it was just felt nice, I guess.
Right. No, it was awesome to see the team kind of come together. And then kind of final thoughts here from you, Baranek. You have really stepped up for this team here as well. 5-0-5 on the Tiamat in your last game. Game 2, 0-2-11. Still a great game on the Tiamat. What have you seen in your own personal growth? Are you really now starting to feel like you're at your full potential here at the SPL level, or you still have plenty of room to grow? Because you've had some fantastic games here as of late. To think that you might have more space to grow is definitely a scary thought.
Yeah, my mindset is always improvement, no matter what sort of like peak I have. I just always look to improve no matter what. And today was, I feel like, kind of my redemption game.
Sure.
Because I mean, everything is on the line, right? So
I
feel like that's when I'm the best. I feel like I'm very composed, like in general. So.
And hey, the good news is you guys have got plenty of games that are all on the line. Everything's on the line in the Phase 1 playoffs come up next weekend. Baranek, big weekend here for you guys. Looking forward to seeing you in the Phase 1 playoffs. Congrats. Get some rest, and we'll see you next weekend.
Yes, sir.
Love to hear that from Baranek. Remember, even in the Game 1 loss, he was 5-2-6 on that Raijin. So in the Game 2 win, the only time he went killless here in this set, Baranek has absolutely stepped up to the plate. Great to see the Solar Scarabs find that success in a really meaningful game that pushes them on to the Phase 1 playoffs. And Taco, do you echo some of that sentiment that you almost feel bad for the Kings given how their Season 8 had started and you miss out on Phase 1 playoffs?
Well, if anything, I'd imagine the Kings would be a little bit more upset with either the Jade Dragons or the Oni Warriors. Can't really side between the two. Maybe the Oni Warriors are going to be a newfound nemesis here for the Kings because they were the ones who really had to step up in order to even put the Scarabs into a position for today, and the fact that Scarabs were able to deliver off of it, I think, just kind of speaks volumes in terms of the caliber of the team play that we can see in the league.
And I think one thing Baranek brought up there that's very important is, I asked, what does it mean you had a rough start as a team, but you've now brought it back and you made it to the Phase 1 playoffs? He's like, look, I mean, obviously this was important. It's the best win of the year so far, but we've taken these games and these sets off top teams, and this weekend shows that. Even in a loss to the Jade Dragons, the Solar Scarabs go all three. There are your final Group B standings. Oni Warriors up top, Jade Dragons just behind, and the Solar Scarabs will clinch that third and final spot with a 1-2 win-loss record. And Taco, I think that is a bit of a, I don't know, smokescreen's not the right word. I don't think you can look at the win-loss there for the Solar Scarabs because I think every team coming out of Group B, Solar Scarabs included, whether it's the Camelot Kings as well, but it is the Solar Scarabs. I think that no team from that group, or Group A for that matter, can be scoffed at going into next weekend.
Not in the slightest. All of these teams, I think, are definitely showing everyone back at home, especially us here on the desk, that week in, week out, they are willing to make changes. They are willing to adapt throughout their sets. I'm really liking the shift that we see throughout picks and bans specifically whenever teams do end up dropping a game early on. And I just think that it's really cool to see the level of adaptation that all of these players can provide, individually speaking, and across the board as a team too.
I think the Solar Scarabs have quickly become one of the more exciting teams to watch in this league, haven't they? Where it's just the play style, the scrappiness, the interesting kind of cadence to some of their gameplay is just so fun to watch.
I think for me, it's just that when the Scarabs started off, they came in to the league, I think, trying to mesh a little bit more to everybody else's play style. But as of late, it seems they've leaned more and more into their own style of play, which is just aggression. This is a team that knows how to perform best whenever they're able to just W at their opponents. And
love it.
Hey, you play into your strengths.
It's hard not to love watching that type of gameplay, right? Just the aggression, all-out style. And it works here for the Solar Scarabs, who find a win over the Kings in 3, and that means the Solar Scarabs moving on to the Phase 1 playoffs. So that's only 1 out of 2 games we have for you guys here today. Make sure to stick around. We've got the Olympus Bolts versus the Tartarus Titans up next.